brief summary. Let's make that a little bigger. So this is an AU like noir story that was based on a graphic that someone made that was like a fake movie poster for something called The Handmaiden's Revenge, which is just a poster. It was no information about it. And I took it and made it into this like JaneRezi sort of like noir fic AU. Jane is a private investigator in New York City. This is set in an AU where around 1900 in Earth, the Alternians just kind of appeared. They started showing up and settling on Earth, and they became like, there's millions of them, so they've become a pretty big part of the world, and they changed history in a lot of ways. Like an Alternian stopped World War One from happening by preventing the Archduke's assassination, and that had the cascading effect of like the Alternians in Europe are very well regarded, and the whole fascism thing never really caught on. And then there's also like there are issues that popped up in the United States where some of the economic stuff didn't happen, but also you have like prejudice against the Alternians, and the United States is still the United States, so there's still all like the regular racism and classism and all that other shit. So it's kind of an interesting AU. And in this story, the story starts out where a bunch of people have been killed, and Jane's originally hired to deliver a note to Gamzee, and finds him dead. She's hired by Vriska, and Vriska and Gamzee are both involved with this sort of the Alternian organized crime world in New York. And Gamzee's been killed, and Jane starts trying to figure out why. She runs into Terezi. They start working together. They eventually end up starting to get feelings for each other after spending some time together, after having been like almost killed. And the whole like trauma bonding, sort of thing going on. So they end up being targeted by people they don't know who they are or why. What comes out is that they believe that Damara Megiddo is going around killing all these people that, like, basically people that had hurt her. And they discover that there's this whole plot going on about, like, human trafficking that a bunch of people were involved in. Gamzee Tagora is involved. And the grandpa, this is a divergent AU. Grandpa Harley was involved as kind of the financial backer of all of this. The rich white person, who, yeah, Jade is in here. She's like suspecting that her grandfather is into some real shady shit, so she contacts them. They are attacked a few times. Jake English in this is a very like, is basically an enforcer for his grandfather, who's going around trying to kill them. They eventually find Damara's apartment and discover that she is, in fact, dead, and has been dead for a while, so she wasn't doing the killing. And Aradia shows up, immediately tries to kill Vriska because she assumes that Vriska is involved in all of this. They end up figuring out that that's not true. Aradia explains that she and Damara had this kind of like, they sort of formed like a sibling relationship, even though that's not really what Alternians sort of naturally do. Like they're genetically kind of similar, but they lived like they were sisters. And so when Damara was killed, Aradia took it on herself to go basically on this, Kill Bill style revenge spree. So now they're at the point where they've kind of got all this information, but the last person involved is Mina, who is kind of in charge of the whole, crime syndicate in New York, and they don't really know how to get to her or do anything to fix any of this. So they're trying to figure out like what the hell are we going to do to get in and finish all this. And yeah, they can't. She's too powerful. Basically, yes, she is very like isolated and powerful, and they've kind of like, the last chapter was kind of like, aha, we have a plan. So now we're going to explain that. Very close to the end of the story. My apologies if it's like super confusing what's happening. Hopefully you can kind of pick up on everything. Solix is important. He's running like a basically he runs like a junk repair shop, but it's implied that it's a front for something else. No, it's fine. I don't expect people to be tuning in every week. I appreciate that anyone listens to these. I'm just mostly having fun talking to myself, to be honest. And the second story, which we will definitely get to tonight, I think is an interesting one. So anyway, I'm just gonna kind of get going here. Chapter 11, The Last Key. It was late now, but Arati assured us that Solix would still be home. He lived above the shop, she said, and she knew he was often downstairs working on projects at odd hours anyway. In fact, she explained, it was better to arrive late since there was less of a chance of us being disturbed. Oh, also probably worth noting, all the narration is Jane. It's all Jane's point of view, so it doesn't change POV characters. Or I figured being shot at by one of the council's hired goons. I wasn't sure if Jake English was still in the picture or not after taking that tumble at Jacob Harley's mansion, but even if he was down for the count, there would always be more to replace him. Rough men ready to do violence were the least interesting, least useful kind of men in the world, and they were always in surplus. We arrived at Solix's back door sometime after 11 at night, and Aradia knocked loudly. Given our previous experience, I was half expecting to be greeted with the business end of a sawed-off shotgun. That's what I was getting ready for as I heard footsteps coming down the back stairs and the clicking of the locks on the door being opened. Solix was standing there in the door wearing a faded nightshirt. He saw Aradia and immediately broke into tears. He held her around her waist and pulled her in close, touching his nose to hers as she smiled.
Oh, thank Christ, I thought you were dead.
He kissed her on the nose, and she closed her eyes, still smiling.
I was so worried about you, after what happened when Damara...
Solix, these are my friends. Aradia spoke quietly, and Solix turned to look at us. I thought friends might be a bit strong, but I didn't say anything. Solix glowered at us.
You again. I heard what happened at Karkath's place. He's scared to even come out in the open now.
Solix, these women have a plan to kill Mina Pisces. I liked how direct she was. I had to give her that. Solix looked like he was about to say something else, but he stopped.
Well, come on in then.
There was a small apartment tucked up above the store, and Solix led us into a cozy kitchen with a table and set of chairs around it. He and Aradia sat down, holding hands, and Aradia was smiling at him. Once everyone was settled, I started explaining how Damara's death wasn't a suicide, but had been carried out by Gamzee after Mina hinted that it needed to be done. That Aradia's choice to kill Gamzee when she did had given us a small window of opportunity. We explained the photos that we had. We could develop those, and that would buy us in to see Mina in person. It has to be Vriska, I said, thinking carefully about that part of the plan. She's got to be the one to deliver the photos, even if the rest of us are there. No one is going to believe that a gumshoe and a city flatfoot are in business of randomly killing witnesses to help out the council. We'll be dead before we can get 5 feet. But I paused to take a deep breath. I hope this next part was actually true and not wishful thinking. They might believe that we're willing to go along with someone who does that out of a desire for money, or to buy our way out of this mess, or whatever. And they will absolutely believe that Vriska sees this as her last way out. That's our in. We just need to know what to do with it. Now it was Solix's turn to speak.
So, I can help you with a couple of those things. First off, I've got a setup to develop your photos, so let's do that. Also, I might have a way you can take advantage of the opening you create, if you're interested.
I was definitely interested. I followed Solix down a second set of stairs that led out into his shop. In the back area, he had a little workshop set up with a bench and some tables. He handed me a briefcase, with some wires sticking out of the top. I took it, wondering what I was holding.
When Aradia told me about her plan, I thought something like this might come up. I know how closely guarded the council is, so I made a little something.
What is it?
A bomb.
Suddenly I had the overwhelming urge to drop the briefcase, although I had no idea what the effect of that would be.
Relax, it's not armed yet. Obviously, it's a specialized stabilized explosive I invented inside a thin metal case in the walls of the briefcase. It'll seem normal enough at first glance, but I can rig it up to a timer. When it goes off, it'll kill everyone inside of 30 feet of it. He was grinning, obviously proud of his ingenuity. As much as the thought terrified me, I was too. This was our chance to hit Mina where she lived without anyone being any the wiser. I assumed that Vriska could pull off her part. Fine. Finish setting it up and we'll take it. I'll take all the advantage we can get. Back upstairs, Aradia was sitting and chatting with Vriska and JaneRezi as if nothing unusual was going on at all. I leaned over toward her. Are you okay right now? I mean, with your sister and all. She looked at me, still smiling. I'm quite distressed about my sister's death, especially now that I know Gamzee was behind it. My killing of him feels hollow, but also he deserved to die, and I feel okay about that. I can either sit here and cry, or try to enjoy what I can in this moment. That was one way to look at it. But there was one other thing, and I wasn't sure how she was going to take it. I can't let you come with us to go after Mina. Oh, I know. She was still smiling. They don't know me, but as soon as they saw that I basically looked the same as Damara, they would put things together quickly. Or they would think I am Damara and act accordingly. They're not stupid, and thinking they are would be a grave mistake. She leaned over and took hold of Solix's arm. I'm going to stay here and pray for you to do well. I know that you'll all try your hardest. She closed her eyes, still smiling, and squeezed Solix's arm softly. So that was it. We had all our keys. We just needed to make one more stop to prepare the rest and rest up. Then we'd be ready to give those keys a turn.
South Harlem, New York City. We arrived back at Fairy Tale. For reference, Fairy Tale is a nightclub in South Harlem. South Harlem in this AU was not economically devastated like it was in the real life because of the Great Depression. So Roxy and Rose, along with Kanaya, all run this little club together. And they know Vriska. They've been involved in the plot a little bit. We arrived back at Fairy Tale as the night was getting into the swing of things. Folks were coming and going in and out of the door, and every time it opened, we could hear the music coming from inside. I was just thinking that I'd never actually seen the place while it was fully open and bustling like this. It was intoxicating. In through the doors, it was even more crowded than I'd first thought. No one paid us any mind as we navigated back through the swell of people looking for Rose, Roxy, or Kanaya. On our way back, we almost bumped into Jade. She was wearing a far shorter dress than she'd been in before, and was holding a tray of drinks. She looked happy for the first time since I'd met her. Hey! She shouted over the noise of the band playing up front. There's a gentleman here to see you. He's over at the bar. I couldn't see, but I saw JaneRezi wrinkle her nose.
Shit, it's high blood from the diamond.
She pointed toward the bar. I could see Vriska visibly bristle as soon as she heard. Still, there was no getting around it. I walked through the crowd toward the bar. Sitting perched on a stool, sipping a martini, was the troll in the purple suit. He had a long face and distinguished features, with short black hair that framed his face perfectly. As we walked up, he raised his glass.
Miss Crocker, Detective Pyrope, and Miss Circuit. Pleased to meet all of your acquaintances. I'm reliably informed that I just missed you earlier at the Diamond Cabaret. No matter. This place is much livelier and better for conversations of a discreet nature. He motioned for us to sit. I figured we didn't have much of a choice at this point, so I pulled up a stool and sat with Vriska, JaneRezi, and this dapper stranger. My name is Eridan Empora, he began. I am here both to represent and protect the interests of a certain group of Alternians from up north, specifically Boston. He wasn't just a troll from Boston. He was here on behalf of the darn Boston Council. I've been keeping a close eye on you for the last couple days, as much as was practical. You certainly had quite the escape at the Harley Manor, didn't you? Good thing that someone came along and pulled your pretty friend out of the fire, isn't it? He smiled slowly. That was you? JaneRezi asked, Aridin nodded and raised his glass. No need for thanks. I was simply doing my duty to a group of fine, upstanding citizens committed to setting right the wrongs of this evil city. He sneered for the briefest moment, and then his good-natured look returned. Besides, given that one among you wishes to relocate to my fair city with her female companion, I thought it only fitting to exemplify the hospitality that we are known for. He paused to take a sip of the martini and closed his eyes for a second, savoring the taste. Did you know that Boston doesn't have Alternian districts like New York? No, it's true. In our city, Alternians and humans live, work, and frolic side by side. Of course, there are the relevant cultural centers and whatnot. Most humans find the whole empress worship thing a bit tiresome, and I've yet to meet an Alternian who genuinely enjoys baseball. But overall, the attitude is one of tolerance and acceptance. I believe that you would, Miss Circuit, find the general attitudes towards you and Miss Egbert would be quite welcoming. It doesn't matter, Vriska interrupted. I can't leave until we're done. Ah, yes, Aridin raised his eyebrows. I'm familiar with your predicament to some degree. And while I'm sure you have concocted a perfectly adequate plan, I would be remiss were I not to offer at least some degree of assistance. Real quick, the fact that June is trans is actually a very important part of the plot, because this is the 1930s and they're still not super cool with trans people. Like we're really welcome now. But yeah, that's going to be like a very important plot point in like 2 chapters. But yeah, Vriska, and this is a June Vriska fic. Why? I asked. Why help us? Why care about any of this? My dear woman, Aridin laughed. Do you think that because we operate outside the bounds of the law at times, that we therefore know nothing of morality or ethics? The Alternian views toward childhood and children in general may have been somewhat harsh in the past, but we have lived among you humans, free of the confines of the Empire, for over 30 years. Our views have softened. The Boston Council, in particular, does not take kindly to those who would mistreat the vulnerable in such a fashion. He took another sip. In truth, we don't know whether it was Mr. Makara or Mr. Gorjek who first began the solicitation and exploitation of underage and otherwise vulnerable women. It doesn't matter. Thank you, distracting motorcycle in the background. Cool. It doesn't matter, as they were both party to the whole sordid affair. They were, of course, aided substantially by Mr. Jacob Harley, and when the news reached Miss Pisces, rather than immediately shut it down and enact swift and terrible punishment on her subordinates and those who abetted them. He stopped and frowned heavily. Instead, she chose to not only ignore but actually support what he was doing. I don't know why. Money, probably, or power, or she's an evil bitch. I don't know, and I don't especially care. The consequences are the same. He finished the drink in one gulp and stared at me. I assume you do have a plan of some kind. I nodded, then explained it to him. When I was done, he laughed. It's bold, I'll give you that. Might even work. Who knows? I'll support you from afar as best I can, but I can't get within sight of that building, or every ruffian and goon inside will be on me. Mina isn't ignorant. She knows that Boston has figured out what she's been up to, and she knows that just tossing us Gamzee wouldn't be enough, even if he were still alive. I'm a known face, so I can't go inside. But yes, your plan definitely has potential. Aridin stood up, stretched his legs, and smiled at us. I will be out there at 9 a.m. tomorrow. It is my understanding that Mina Pisces conducts business generally beginning around 9:30. I would suggest you are not unduly late. With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd on his way out of the club. When he was gone, I looked over to see that Kanaya had apparently materialized out of thin air in the last couple seconds. I see you have spoken with our distinguished out-of-town guest. What are your thoughts? I shrugged. I don't see that we have much of a choice.
a thought occurred. I'm real sorry to impose like this, but do you happen to know of a place we can lay low for the night? My place got tossed, and I feel like Jade's or JaneRezi's might be both on the short list of places the council is watching. Kanaya smiled at me. As a matter of fact, we would be happy to let you stay in the back here. We have some rooms we have used as dressing rooms for our guests in the past. You would be welcome to stay, assuming you are both willing to help out around the establishment for a while. Sure. What else was I going to do? Sit around and worry about dying for several hours? Right before we broke off to go help out the 3 swell gals that own the place, JaneRezi pulled me aside.
Jane, I can't go with you on this one.
Nonsense. I don't mind having you along for the last ride.
No, you don't understand. When this goes down, it's going to be an absolute clam bake, no matter what. If I come with you, I can shoot and I can help. But if I stay behind, I can do something even better. I can cover for you with the coppers. No one knows I'm working this at all except maybe Latula, and I can persuade her not to mention it. If I make sure I'm there when all this hits, I can probably protect you.
The way she said it sounded extremely personal. Not the generic general you, but the very specific, very intimate form of you. I thought about it the entire time I was bussing tables and serving drinks at the bar. I thought about it once all the patrons had gone home and the bar closed for the night. I thought about it as I sat down on the couch in one of the dressing rooms and tried to clear my mind. I thought about it as JaneRezi Pyrope walked in the same dressing room and closed the door behind her.
Can I talk to you?
You. Specific. You. Personal. Hold on. Alrighty. Okay, Chapter 12, A Reflection After Midnight. Real brief note, this has non-explicit sexual activity between 2 consenting adults, described in moderate detail. It's basically cutaway fade to black, like foreplay without being explicit, and then cutaway. Ooh. But if that's a problem, then don't listen, I guess.
Can I talk to you?
The words rang in my ear, even though they were said very quietly. JaneRezi had slipped into the dressing room and closed the door behind her. I heard the soft click of the lock being set. She sounded tentative, embarrassed, almost afraid, even. It felt like it would be a bit much to tell her not to be scared of me, maybe a little bit flippant under the circumstances. We'd cheated death, 3 or 4 times together now? Sure, what's on your mind? I had taken off my revolver and my suit jacket, hung them up on a nearby coat rack. I was in the process of rolling my sleeves up, getting ready to settle in for the night and catch whatever sleep I could before our big finale tomorrow. I had a lot on my mind, but I suppose that JaneRezi did too. And I wasn't of the disposition to tell her she couldn't spill her guts a little. She fidgeted, looked down. Her face was flushed.
I wanted to talk to you about what happened before, at my place.
That came rushing back all at once, kissing her maybe a little bit more than I should have, more than would generally be considered ladylike, and that made me almost want to laugh. I held it out of respect for JaneRezi's feelings, but because I wasn't laughing at her. Just the whole idea of the concept of decorum in a world where I could be snuffed out at a moment's notice, but the idea of me kissing a gal, loving a gal, was maybe a bit too much for some folks' tastes. Okay, sure, let's talk about that. Smooth as ever, Jane Crocker. Casanova has nothing on you. JaneRezi walked over and sat down next to me on the couch.
How do you feel about me, specifically? For real?
I was getting a major sense of déjà vu right then. I took a deep breath, committed to not completely stumbling over my own words this time. We'd been through a fair bit since the last time she asked me. Felt like forever, even inside the space of, 2 days? I sighed heavily and held my breath. What was I going to say to her? That I was pretty sure I was falling in love with her? That sounded a bit rich, especially given how little we knew about each other. But we'd also been through some pretty intense stuff, and I felt like I already knew her in a way that mattered a lot. And did it even matter? I thought she was pretty, and we had fun together when we weren't being shot at. Wasn't that enough? Overthinking. That was my problem. Always overthinking everything. I was about to say something I wasn't going to be able to reel back in if it didn't land. I think you're beautiful, and I'd like to keep seeing you when this is all over. Good start. She didn't seem to be recoiling in terror. She was blushing an awful lot, but I could handle that. Good job, Jane. Good progress. Time for the part I was never going to live down. Why was I even still talking? I think I'm falling in love with you. Oh, wow. That was coming on pretty strong, probably more than needed. She was definitely not going to respond to that. Probably already getting up to run out of the room and not look back. Except she wasn't. She blushed even deeper and buried her head against my neck. I could feel her horns brushing against the bare skin, and I remember thinking that they weren't rough at all. They had a kind of fuzz on them, like a baby goat. It would have been a pretty amusing thought, except my brain wasn't getting a whole lot of time to process it.
I think you're beautiful, too,
JaneRezi said.
I like to keep seeing you, too,
JaneRezi said.
I think I'm falling in love with you, too,
JaneRezi said. My face was on fire. It wasn't 10 degrees hotter in here, it was at least 20. The dames that run this place must have lit a fire under it because it wasn't cooling off, and my face felt like it was bright red. Not that JaneRezi could see. She was still nestled against my neck, kind of cooing. I wasn't sure that if that was the word, but it was making my heart ache to hear it. What the heck? You missed a lot of character development. They got really close to each other. They've known each other for like a week now, but they've been getting like really, really close. The fuzzy horns. Oh, yeah, so that's actually like, I read that somewhere and was like, hey, that's kind of a cute idea. I'm gonna just drop that information in there, and I don't even remember where I read it. Like, I never would have thought of it like that, but it's actually like, hey, that's kind of a neat idea, like antlers. Like, they're not like horns so much, but they're like antlers. Like deer antlers. I wish I could remember where I read that now. Anyway, blah, 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 blah.
You don't get it.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was the wrong voice. You don't get it, I said. There's stuff you don't know about me.
Like what? You take photos of fellows cheating on their ladies? You follow crooked businessmen around to catch them with their fingers in wrong pies? Either business pies or people pies?
She cackled at the last one.
Jane, I know what private eyes do for a living.
No, not that. There's stuff from my past. Things about me you don't know. She laughed.
Next you'll be telling me you like gals a whole lot.
I felt her squeeze me, and I'll be honest, it felt pretty darn good. I wanted so badly to be happy. I just didn't feel like I really deserved it. I'm a crocker. JaneRezi laughed again.
Okay, and? I know your name.
No, I mean, I'm a crocker. Dry goods and supplies, railroads, steamboats, an empire stretching from Maine to California. Crocker. The truth was tumbling out now.
Oh, holy shit! Like Crocker? Oh, shit. Why didn't you say anything? I mean, it's not my business. Why are you working as a PI out of a shitty office? Why are you doing any of this?
They disowned me. Tumble. JaneRezi sat back a bit. Even with her sightless eyes, I could feel her looking at me, seeing me for the first time.
Why didn't they do that?
I brought a gal home. They told me to cut that nonsense out or they were going to write me out of the family. I didn't cut that nonsense out. They wrote me out of the family. Tumble. Everything was spilling out now.
Shit, but why is that a big deal? I mean, it sounds awful not to have your family's support, but you seem to be doing fine on your own.
The gal definitely had tact when she wanted to. I'd give her that. Yeah, deer have like a thin layer of like skin and fuzz over their antlers, so they're actually like fuzzy to the touch. It's really interesting. At least when they're like forming. I think the antlers break out eventually. It's not that. It's everything we've been through going in the last few days. All the stuff with the Harleys. I'm sure that my family does the same kind of thing. I know they owned slaves back when that was a thing, and I'm sure they're not doing much better by their workers now. and I'm sure that somewhere in the whole mess there's plenty of young girls who were told that the Crocker family had a great job for them as long as they were willing to move away from any kind of friends or family. It eats me up because I wasn't strong enough to put my foot down on it, and now I'm just kind of a mostly functional half-alcoholic who drinks to forget what a piece of shit she is sometimes and spends her time tracking down scumsuckers for petty cash. I groaned loudly. I guess what I'm saying is I hate myself, and I don't understand why you don't too. Yeah, there it was. I was ready for her to recoil now, to talk about how I was a piece of garbage. I closed my eyes, ready for whatever she had to say about me. I felt her lips brush mine with a soft exhale of breath. She waited. I waited. It felt like forever, even though it was probably only about 2 seconds. I leaned forward, and JaneRezi met the kiss, leaning in and catching my bottom lip between hers. I think I moaned out loud. I don't even know why I thought about it in that moment, but I remember thinking, I hope she didn't hear that, as if I wasn't desperately pressing my body up against hers and snaking my hands in between her hair. When I reached those soft velvet-covered horns, JaneRezi gasped. I heard her whispering into my ear.
Your family is who you choose to be close to, not who your blood is close to. Humans worry too much about that.
She had a point. I'd mostly chosen to be alone, sometimes surrounded by my good friends Jack Daniels, an unnamed bourbon I could buy for $1 a bottle. But I was making the choice to be with her. Right there, right then. I didn't recall undoing the buttons from her shirt, but here we were. My hand was up her back, running over the smooth gray skin up the nape of her neck. JaneRezi shivered. She bent forward a little, and she was undoing my shirt's buttons now, her hands as fast as I'd ever seen them, not making a single mistake as she went from top to bottom. With my shirt off, it seemed the room got even warmer, if such a thing were possible. I kept my eyes closed, feeling JaneRezi's warm hands dancing around my stomach and up to my brassiere. And that was coming off. And that was a thing that was happening. I felt naked, mostly because I was literally half naked at this point. Is this a good idea? Yeah, it was about the silliest thing I could have said at that point. I never claimed to be very good at this kind of thing. JaneRezi snorted, laughing into my neck and kissing me, biting ever so softly.
Probably.
She kissed my neck again, and I felt her hands cupping my breast, and I'll be honest, it felt a lot better to focus on that than the self-doubt that had been crawling up inside me for so long. I hope you don't think this is going to turn into one of those kind of stories, right? I've said it before, I'm not that kind of gal. You get the general idea. Use your imagination and fill in the rest if you really have to. We had eventually ended up completely naked. Now, I'm not entirely sure how or why it happened, but it definitely happened. It was also, perhaps, the prelude to other events that night that I don't feel entirely comfortable discussing with folks I don't know that well. So by the end of things, we were lying on the couch naked, kind of draped with a sheet that Kanaya had left in the dressing room before. I had JaneRezi in my arms, and her head was down on my chest, and again, I'm trying to be perfectly honest here. It felt a lot better than I felt a lot better than I had in a long time. I still had a lot of uncertainty and doubt and fear swirling around inside me, but I was also living in a kind of pleasant haze. JaneRezi was breathing softly, still awake, and I kept rubbing her back and shoulder while she purred. I was still getting used to the little noises she made.
Jane?
JaneRezi shifted against me. Yeah?
Whatever happens, I wanted you to know how I felt about you, yeah? I don't want you to feel like I'm using you just to get my kicks and then ditch you somewhere.
Even if I thought that was a possibility, I wasn't sure that I especially cared in the moment. I think it would have been worth the break from the unrelenting hell of the last few days. Still, I shook my head and, her comment, continuing to stroke her back softly. Okay, who's talking?
Do you want to keep seeing each other after?
It felt like I'd been waiting for a surprisingly long time to hear her ask that. Again, not sure it made sense. We'd only known each other for about a week. Still, it felt pretty good, and I was well past the point of caring about decorum. Heck, I said, I'd love that.
Good.
She buried her head against my chest and wrapped her arms around me.
Jane, can I ask you something serious? I don't want to be a downer.
Sure.
Why did you join the force?
I thought for a minute. It was a complicated question.
No, that's not true. My reasoning was probably a little too simple. I wanted to stop people like them, like my family. I think I always had the sense that they were bad in so many ways, but I didn't want to let myself think about it. Once they kicked me out, I just wanted to be there to protect people, to help people. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke again in a softer voice. Why did you leave? Because I wasn't stopping people like my family. I was helping them stay in power and tamp down the people under them. I sighed. But then I just ended up shadowing cheaters and petty crooks and basically nothing else. I carry that damn gun around everywhere, and I've never even fired the stupid thing except at the range. Terezi giggled.
You act like such a damn hatchet man, but you're not. You're really not, are you?
I flushed deep red, and I felt her kissing me on the neck.
It's okay, she whispered. I don't mind. You're smart and you're kind, deep down inside. I think it's sweet.
What about you? I asked. You're pretty tough. How do you do it?
I don't.
She halted for the briefest second.
I've never killed anyone. Never even really hurt anyone. I reacted to Jake because you were about to get killed. I just acted without even thinking about it. I can usually tell what people are feeling about how they smell, from how they smell and sound. I'm good at reading that. The first time we met, when you were down behind the counter, I knew that you wouldn't really want to fight me. And I knew that you weren't the one that had killed Gamsey. I could smell that your gun hadn't even been fired since it was last cleaned.
She put her head up against my chest, listening to my heartbeat with one ear.
So I bluffed and played my gut. That's what I'm good at.
Silence descended for a bit, heavy like a thick woolen blanket.
Hey, Jane?
She sounded sleepy. Yeah?
You ever wonder if we could do what we do, but for good? Like, actually help bring bad people to justice and help people. Maybe help people like Damara before things end up so bad they can't ever come back.
I had never admitted it to another living soul, but this was something I frequently thought about, especially in those dark, quiet hours when I'd been drinking too much, or when I couldn't sleep, when I downed the last bottle and then thought, is this all there is? Yeah, Terezi, I have. She was still laying on my chest, and I could feel my heart beating a little quicker as that fact really began to sink in.
Please, be careful.
I started to respond, but she was already asleep.
Yeah, like one of the reasons I didn't read this story earlier is I was starting to read it right before all the protests happened, and it's a very the beginning of the story has a lot of really rough shit in it, and I was not mentally in a place to do that because I was out filming at the protests and the cops fired on us. So I was dealing with some shit too. But one of the reasons I wanted to read this again is that the overall tone of these is like really anti-police. Like even though Terezi's a detective in the beginning, like the overall thing is like, no, the police are not there to help people. They're there to protect power. Exactly. Like that's the ultimate message of this story. It takes it a while to like really sink in, but it's like, no, fuck the cops. Okay, this is the big like conclusion chapter, and then there's the epilogue. Chapter 13, Devil's Dance. Trigger warning for this one. Does have some bloody violence depicted. I would say canon levels of violence for Homestuck, and it has an instance of misgendering and dead naming a trans woman, portrayed in a resoundingly negative light. That is something that is kind of addressed in the epilogue part of this. I agree. That's something I don't think is addressed well in Homestuck, and this fic, like, you'll see. We're gonna get there in like 20 minutes. But yeah, the fact that she's a cop and like doesn't really like isn't critical about that in Homestuck. I tried to like take a more critical approach to her feelings. The Financial District, New York City. The tower had no other name. It was simply known by its street address within the Financial District. Beyond that, it needed no name. It was an imposing fortress of a building, the largest one to be purpose-built by the trolls. It followed their typically heavy architectural style, not so much stabbing into the skies, bashing on it with a massive hammer that beat upon the heavens themselves. But there were no angels up in the tower, only devils. Vriska and I were dressed up in our Friday morning best. I had on my usual suit jacket and trousers over a white shirt. Vriska was wearing a blue suit and skirt with a corset underneath with wide, rigid supports. She looked up at the tower slowly.
Cracker, it's gonna be rough in there. Everyone on the inside who's holding iron is gonna be loyal to the New York Council. They're not gonna let us through with any kind of weapon.
I had figured as much. I hadn't even bothered to bring my revolver.
Let me do the talking. I'm the stone-cold killer here. You're the easily bought flatfoot that I use to do my legwork.
She sounded confident enough that I almost believed it. If I didn't know better. That wasn't going to be a problem. I'd learned enough about Alternian culture in the last few days to maybe fill a 5-minute lull in conversations. But understanding the nuances well enough to not get both our heads blown off was well above my qualifications. Through the glass doors at the front of the building, Vriska holding the briefcase and me with my hands in my jacket pockets. Once we crossed that threshold, there was no going back. Realistically, there had been no going back for a while now. Past the door was a large lobby, all clad in white stone, with a large counter running through the middle. A couple of largest trolls stood behind the counter wearing dark suits and fedoras that were tucked neatly in between their horns. One of the trolls was holding a Tommy gun in his hands. They were both frowning. Cool as ice in the dead of winter, Vriska walked up to the troll closest to us.
We're here to see Mina Pisces. Tell her it's about Damara Megiddo and Gamzee Makara. She'll know what it means.
The troll glared at her, but he picked up a telephone off the counter and dialed a number. After a short conversation, he hung up the phone and nodded.
The briefcase comes with us.
Shit. Vriska smiled.
Oh, but there's some important documents in there that only Miss Pisces gets to see.
The goon shrugged.
So, take 'em out.
Shit. I had been prepared to be searched, but not for this. But Vriska didn't seem surprised, or even worried. She opened the briefcase, reached inside, and took out the folder with the photos inside. She closed the briefcase again. Her hand almost imperceptibly flitted to a small catch inside as she did it. She looked right at me and nodded. We were on the clock. The big fella who wanted the briefcase set it down and checked us for weapons. Of course, we didn't have anything. Holding in a place like this would have been a ludicrous idea. Once the troll was satisfied that we weren't packing heat or carrying a blade, he grabbed the briefcase and motioned for us to follow him. Back through the stone lobby. There was a bank of elevators at the end. Big Troll pushed the button on the far one, and we stood and waited.
Word of advice,
He said,
be careful what you say to Miss Pisces. She's had a pretty rough last couple days, and she's been in a pretty low mood.
Yeah, I could imagine. I didn't say it out loud. The elevator slid open, and we all stepped inside while the troll punched the button for the top floor. Up we went, just 3 folks in a small metal box packed with a pound of explosives powerful enough to blow out the side of the elevator shaft. I wasn't nervous at all. Wasn't even sweating bullets that had nothing to do with the stuffy heat of the elevator. After what felt like an hour, the elevator reached the top floor, and the doors slid open. A cool breeze wafted in from the floor, and I realized that this place actually had air conditioning. I supposed it made sense, given the wealth of the owner and the fact that she was reported to rarely leave the building. Our guard motioned for us to walk forward. We approached another guard, a troll gal in a suit with long features that reminded me of Vriska, seated behind a desk, a Browning automatic rifle propped up next to her. This was some seriously heavy iron for a personal guard. Big Troll handed Gal Troll the briefcase.
These ladies are here to see Miss Pisces. Already been checked. Hold this briefcase for 'em.
I'll take it to the guard room. They can pick it up after. Big Troll seemed satisfied by this and walked back to the elevator, punching the lower floor in and disappearing back below. Gal Troll looked us over.
Miss Pisces is through the doors up ahead. She's expecting you. I'll keep your briefcase safely in the guard room until you're done.
She pointed us to the doors and stood up to walk the briefcase to the guard room, taking her BAR with her. Slowly, Vriska and I walked towards the ornate, brass-covered double doors leading to Mina Pisces' lair. Weird choice of words, I know, but it felt like it fit. Vriska glanced over at me.
Jane, you want to know a secret about me?
I nodded.
I really wanted to be an actor, ever since I was a Wriggler. By the time troll actors became a bigger thing, I was already wrapped up in so much else, but I always wanted to act. I think I might do that when I get to Boston, you know?
She smiled. She smiled and she changed. Her face grew cold, emotionless. The smile disappeared into a hollowed void behind her eyes. I couldn't help but wonder how much of this was acting and how much was how she really felt. Clutching the folder tightly, Vriska pushed open the double doors and we walked inside. The office was richly appointed. All the furniture looked like it was made of solid mahogany and it cost a small fortune. Artwork, some of which I even recognized, lined the walls. Underfoot were various colorful carpets. The wall was a giant glass window that overlooked the city, and out in front of it was a massive desk. In the middle of the room was a set of comfortable lounge chairs, surrounded by a small table. In one of those chairs sat a tall troll woman in a sharply cut suit. From her braided hair and glasses, not to mention the fact that she was the only other person in the room, I figured this had to be Mina Pisces.
Vriska Circuit and Jane Crocker, please come in and have a seat.
Her tone was overtly friendly, but there was something dangerous underneath. We took the seats across from her.
I would offer you a drink, but I think my allowing you to walk in here without being shot is hospitality enough. I was told you had business with me regarding a certain Gamzee Makara and Damara Megiddo.
I know that the Boston Council wanted Gamzee dead, Vriska interrupted, her voice cold. I know they were starting to figure out what you were all doing. Mina laughed.
The Boston Council? They couldn't find their own asses if you handed them a map.
Vriska didn't break her cool, not for a second.
But you're worried, because Damara Megiddo is taking out your associates, and you're at least a little bit worried she'll come after you next. Do you see this place?
Mina gestured around the room.
This is a fortress. I have dozens of armed guards, and no one comes in here with a weapon that I don't explicitly trust. I'm not worried. I think you're lying, Vriska said, her voice even. At least a little bit. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been telling Gamzee to clean up after himself.
Mina's eyes widened.
How did you... Damara got to Gamzee first. My associate here found him in his apartment with a little bit of extra ventilation in the skull. Your telegram was there, but obviously he didn't act fast enough.
Shit. Yeah, he's always been unreliable like that. All the damn soper he was always eating.
Vriska smiled, all teeth and ice. Damara was causing you a lot of problems.
She took the folder and opened it, handing the photos to Mina.
I don't think she'll be causing you any more.
What is this? She killed herself.
No, not exactly. Although I'm sure it'll look that way to a casual observer.
Mina smiled now, matching the intensity of Vriska's. The main difference is I knew she was genuinely feeling this.
Oh, very good. You did this.
Vriska nodded.
Miss Crocker tracked her to her apartment in the Bowery, and she was able to talk my way inside. Choked her out and staged a suicide. Slit wrists. Very sad. A victim who just couldn't bear the weight of life anymore and all that. Death by self-hatred.
Oh, I like that. Mina set the photos down on the table and clapped her hands together.
I will fully admit that I misjudged you, Vriska. If I may call you Vriska.
Sure. You wouldn't be the first to make that mistake.
Oh, but I won't make it again. And what is it that you want exactly?
I want to leave. To go up to Boston and for you to leave myself and my associate alone. Mina's smile broadened.
Of course.
Her eyes narrowed. I suddenly was feeling much less okay about this. Of course, I can't let you do that, Vriska. I saw Vriska's eye twitch just a bit, but she managed to hold her stage face. Why not? I know the Boston Council wants me dead. They'll scoop you up as soon as you get there and convince you to tell them everything you know about me, one way or another. I simply can't risk it. Why would I stay here? Mina narrowed her eyes. Well, practically speaking, because I don't know that the Boston Council will just let you walk around unharmed, especially if they hear you've been helping me in such a dramatic fashion. Also, I'm not letting you leave. Vriska moved to interrupt, but Mina put up a finger. And before you ask me some nonsense about what's stopping you, how are things going with you and that girl you're seeing? Vriska's face almost collapsed again. Her eye twitched once more. That bad feeling was crawling right up into my guts and threatening to choke me. Mina got up out of her chair and stepped toward Vriska, kneeling down in front of her. The grin was all over her face, completely devoid of anything resembling joy. It was the grin of a wolf who just trapped a rabbit. Yes, I know about your gal. How is working in the city planner's office going for John? Is he taking a liking to it? Her smile broadened. Her smile stopped. Her smile died. Her face fell and she made a muffled oomph. I looked down and saw Vriska's hand at Mina's stomach. The blade was buried to the end and bright fuchsia blood dripped down. Vriska's mask came off and she growled at Mina. Her name is pronounced June, and you're a piece of shit. In a moment that was almost too fast to track, Vriska pulled the knife out of Mina's stomach and slashed once, catching her in the side of the throat. Fuchsia spurted out as Mina toppled to the floor, her blood soaking quickly into the beautiful rug below. She reached out to clutch her throat, but Vriska stepped down hard on her hand, pinning it. You will never hurt her or anyone else. Not ever again. Vriska watched. I watched. Mina quickly lost consciousness, and I knew she was on her way out already. It was gruesome, but at the same time, I didn't feel bad. I wondered how long we had on the clock. Vriska sat back down, wiping the knife on the carpet. I saw a spot in her corset that looked like it was missing a supporting busk. It took my mind a second to make the connection and realize how she'd been able to smuggle a knife in. Her face was back to normal. She looked exhausted and terrified and shocked all at once. I'm not a killer, Jane. She let the knife drop to the floor. I didn't have a choice. To be quite honest, I didn't think she really did. I was starting to wonder how long it would be before Gal Troll came back in to check on us with her BAR. That lasted maybe 2 minutes. The sound of the explosion shook the upper floor, and I could feel the traces of the pressure wave even inside the office. Solix had somewhat undersold the capabilities of his explosive device. I turned to Vriska and grabbed her shoulder. We need to leave now. They'll be out in force soon. Vriska and I went to the door and opened it slowly. Smoke was pouring out into the lobby, and Galtro was lying in front of the desk in a daze. The explosion had done major damage to the upper floor, and the shockwave had punched out into the lobby and shattered windows. I ran up to Gal Troll and grabbed the BAR from the floor. I raised the heavy rifle up and brought the butt down heavily on Gal Troll's head, hearing a wet kind of thump as she collapsed to the floor. The elevator chimed. I was surprised it was even still working, and the door opened. And out stepped the hulking, mustached figure of Jake English, left shoulder wrapped in a bandage and holding his Tommy gun in his right hand. I didn't stop to think. I raised the BAR and pulled the trigger, spitting lead wildly toward the elevator as Jake ducked back. Vriska and I ran, blindly following the hallway to the side of the elevator and hoping desperately that the stairs were there. I could hear Jake's heavy footfalls behind us. A cracking burst from the Tommy gun lit up the hallway. Hey, Bucky. Cool. Awesome. Good to have you. We're getting toward the very climax of this story, and then we're going to start the second one after the epilogue of this. And splinters of stonework and plaster sprayed around us.
I turned, firing the BAR again and hitting nothing. I saw the door to the staircase and I hit it at a run, with Vriska following right behind me. Another round of bullets smashed into the door behind us. We took the stairs down at full speed, nearly tripping on the way. We were one flight down when I heard the door bang open again, and Jake was on the stairs. He jumped down the first full flight, and I let out 2 shots with the BAR, forcing him to back off just long enough so we could keep our lead. I wondered how much ammo the BAR had left in it. 2 more flights, and Jake was catching up. I didn't have time to stop and shoot at him anyway. Another flight, and I grabbed Vriska's arm, and we burst out the door into another hallway. I had no idea where we were going. Just needed to find another staircase. We took random turns, past confused-looking trolls wearing business attire, ran until our lungs were burning. We ducked into the office to catch our breath. Bullets ripped through the thin walls, scattering into the building. We ran again, breaking from the office and drawing more heat from Jake as he brought his Tommy gun to bear on us. We cut across another office and doubled back. On the way, I fired the BAR again and heard it audibly click as the gun ran out of ammo or jammed. It didn't matter which. I tossed the heavy rifle down and we ran even faster, back toward the staircase. We managed to get back to the stairs we'd come from without running into Jake again. Panting, we continued to run down the stairs. Cool. Awesome, clever. Taking each turn in the stairwell as fast as we possibly could. I didn't hear Jake behind us. I didn't think I heard Jake behind us, but I couldn't be sure. I wish that JaneRezi was still with us. She would know for sure. The last few flights of stairs went by in a blur, and finally we were on the last one, the door that led out into the lobby. We pushed through and immediately were surrounded by absolute chaos. The noise of the explosion and the gunfire had carried, and trolls were running everywhere, looking for cover or gathering up weapons and running towards various rally points. There was no one sitting at the main desk, and the way to the street looked clear. All we had to do was make it the next 40 yards and disappear into the city. All we had to do was make it past the bank of elevators that was opening to reveal an extremely angry-looking Jake English. We sprinted, heading behind the pillars, and slid behind the central desk as bullets chipped away at the stone. The shooting stopped briefly, and I heard the harsh clatter of a drum hitting the stone floor, and the ominous mechanical click as a new one was set in place.
What Jake voice am I going to do?
There's nowhere else to go. If you come out now, I'll make it quick, and I won't go track down June and kill her too. His voice was different than I had imagined it would be, almost pleasant, but I believed every word he said. He let a couple rounds loose from the Tommy gun. They hit the stone and ricocheted off harmlessly. He was starting to walk again. He was coming closer. Vriska's eyes were wide, but she wasn't looking at me. She was staring toward the door, toward a figure in purple standing in the middle of a crowd of people running out of the building. The figure raised a carbine to his shoulder, aimed. There was a flash of light and the glass of the front door shattered. An imperceptible fraction of a second later, a blast of noise and the sound of someone punching a hole in a ripe melon from behind the counter. Then, a half-second later, a heavy thud. The figure in purple was already vanishing into the crowd. We peeked over the counter and saw Jake's body lying a few feet away from us. The Tommy gun sat uselessly at his side. Given the rather large exit wound in the back of his head, I doubted very much that he would be recovering from this one. That was when the coppers finally decided to show up. A whole troop of troll officers came thundering in the door, holding scatterguns and rifles, screaming at us to put our hands up. We were happy to oblige. They stormed back through the lobby. The trolls that were armed quickly saw that this wasn't going to go their way and dropped their weapons. Vriska and I were cuffed and hauled out the front door in 5 minutes. We were marched over to the other side of the street and sat roughly down on the corner while the cops set up a rough perimeter and kept flooding into the building. The rough troll fellow that was guarding us decided he wasn't feeling very talkative, so my attempts to ask him exactly what was happening might as well have been directed at a giant brick wall. I heard a familiar voice from behind us.
Hi. Yeah, this is the very end of the story. We are going to start the next one very shortly. They're basically raiding the Troll Alternate Universe Council. I'll give a quick rundown on the universe, and we'll start the next story after, like, the next chapter.
I heard a familiar voice from behind us.
Officer, Detective Pyro, Third Alternian. I'll be taking these two in for special questioning.
She sounded like she wasn't going to take shit from anyone.
Least of all some random copper in a beat uniform. He muttered something and disappeared quickly into the crowd of milling officers nearby. JaneRezi helped us up off the curb and let us out of the cuffs. "You're in charge here?" I asked. JaneRezi laughed.
No one's in charge right now. They're just sick of the New York Council making us all look bad. A couple other joints are being raided right now. This shakedown is going to get messy, but it was a long time coming. Anyway, I saw you two getting hauled out.
She smiled broadly.
So I bluffed and played my gut. It's what I'm good at.
She winked. I wrapped my arms around her and kissed her right on the mouth. Yeah, this is like a Detective AU. So we're into like the end of this story. This is just kind of getting to know the characters. The second one goes into more like detailed plot shit. All right. Chapter 14, Letters After the Storm Subsides. Dear Jane, I'm happy that you helped us. I feel like Damara can be at peace now after what you and JaneRezi and Vriska did at the end. I'm very grateful, and Solix is too. You're all good people, and you deserve to be happy. Even though I'm still very sad that Damara is dead, I'm happy that I got to know the three of you, and that you helped me out. If you ever need help, please come to Solux. We live right over the store, and are always happy to have you over for tea if you would like. I heard Vriska moved away, and I'm sad about that, but still happy for her in June. Please take care of JaneRezi. She is nice and sweet inside, and I hope both of you make each other very happy. I've sent a package to you with something I want you to have. I don't want to keep it. All it does is bring back bad memories. Please do whatever you want with it. Sincerely, Aradia Megiddo.
Janie, can you believe I'm living it up in Boston now? After June and I moved, I was worried it'd be really hard to settle in here, but the council has been a huge help. I don't know how to describe it, but they're not like the New York Council at all. They mostly focus on trying to organize stuff to help poor people and do things that the law can't or won't let them do to keep people happy. Like I said, it's hard to describe, but it's great. I've been working with them for a little bit now, but they said I'm pretty much free to do whatever. I've been studying acting here, and I should be opening in my first play soon. They don't have much of a problem with troll actors up here, so I get to go on stage when the Somerville Theater opens their next play. I'll send you and JaneRezi tickets, and you can come up here and visit. June found a job with the city of Boston in their planning department. I guess that puts her at odds with me and the council sometimes, but the city here has a weird relationship with the council. I think most of the time they just kind of let them do what they want, as long as no one is getting hurt. We're going to the North Shore over the weekend. We're going to go look for crabs.
Yes, it so is.
I like them because they're kind of like spiders, except they live in the ocean. Seriously, I owe you and JaneRezi so much. It means a lot to me that you did all this for me. I wasn't ready for that.
I will read that if I will probably not have time to read that because I'm in the middle of a big one, but you know what I will do is I will take that link and oh my god, the stream chat. If you're in the Will at Homestuck server, drop that link in the live stream suggestion channel and we will read it tomorrow because we're going to do the community thing. Yes, that is exactly what I was suggesting. I'm just bad with words right now. And also my Discord or my Streamlabs is like not showing me links. Yes, not my Discord. The Discord for Will at Homestuck. Or just, hold on. Let me pull that up real quick and I will. Yeah, but thank you, Bucky. For some reason, Streamlabs isn't like showing me my own chat, so I'm getting like none of the actual like links. I'm just watching it on my screen because I have it on the screen. Anyway, the thing. Blah, 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 blah.
You're the best, Jane. If there's anything I can ever do for you, let me know. Love, Vriska.
Detective Jane, I'm writing to let you know that I'm in the process of dissolving most of my grandfather's holdings. With him and Jake both dead, that left me as the sole heir to his fortune. While the thought of living in luxury is appealing, the thought of doing so on the back of the suffering of countless innocents is not.
So I'm selling off most of what he had and using the money to fund various charitable causes throughout the city. I'll retain enough to live modestly off of, and will help to oversee the administration of these various charities. In particular, I'm pleased to let you know that Arati and I have come up with the idea of opening the Damara Megiddo School for Young Women. It will be open to both human and Alternian women, and will provide continuing education in the arts, sciences, mathematics, and various career fields to help them remain independent throughout their lives. I'm sorry that we had to meet like we did, but I'm glad that you were there to help me when I needed it. Thank you again, Jane. Warm regards, Jade Harley.
This Rose. Okay.
Jane, I wanted to let you know that I appreciate very much the way you handled this whole thing. I know I might come off as a bit skeptical of you, but I genuinely believe that you were approaching this with a good heart. I also appreciate that you made sure that none of this whole mess blew back on me, Kanaya Roxy, or anyone else at Fairy Tale. We worked hard to build up what we have here, and I was really worried that you were just going to come stomping in and destroy that. I'm glad that I was wrong about you. We might not be very close, but I am glad to know you. Rose Lalonde. Dear Miss Crocker, I'm writing to inform you that, as far as me and my associates are concerned, your debt with us is completely free and clear. We have similarly communicated this sentiment to Miss Pyrope and Miss Circuit. Although Miss Circuit is employed part-time in our organization, rest assured that she is doing so of her own free will and through no untoward motivation on our part. In recognition for your assistance, I would be happy to extend my associate's favor to you, along with your companion, Miss Pyrope, should either of you find yourselves in Boston and in need of aid. We will be more than happy to help as a gesture of goodwill towards friends. Regards, Erden Empora.
Cool. Last chapter. Nice and short epilogue. For reference, for those who weren't listening before, the bulk of the story takes place in 1932. So this is basically like a year later, or 6 months later, or something like that. Chapter 15, The Payoff, New York City, 1933. Pyrope and Crocker, investigators. The new glass shone on the door, and the crisp lettering stood out beautifully. I stood back, hand around JaneRezi's waist, and admired it. Not where I expected to be a year ago, but sometimes you just kind of had to take life as it came at you. The place had been cleaned up, of course, and improved significantly. We'd each received a mysterious cashier's check in the mail shortly after everything went down with the council. A check for a considerable sum of money. So JaneRezi quit the force, and I moved in with her. The office just became an office, with the back room converted to a file room and a second desk put in for JaneRezi. I'd made a few changes. Stopped drinking so much. Stopped smoking, too. The smell really bothered JaneRezi, and I figured her comfort was worth losing one of my formerly favorite vices. The money had been more than enough to keep us afloat for a while, and after we opened as PCI, we noticed that we started getting a steady stream of clients. Not jilted lovers, either. Folks with real problems that needed solving. Folks the police didn't bother with. Folks down on their luck. And every single month, a cashier's check showed up in the mail. We tried to backtrace the check once, but dead-ended at a company called Canis Lupus that was headquartered in Westchester at an address that was actually an abandoned brewery that had been falling apart for several decades. After that, we decided to just let the issue lie and keep doing what we could to help people out. But that day, we were off. It was a beautiful August afternoon, and the weather had cooled off a bit over the last few days. So JaneRezi and I were going to go take a walk down by the river and enjoy some time together. There was also the matter of the mysterious box that Aradia had sent along. Her letter had been painfully vague about the contents. I picked up that small box and took it to my desk, popping out my pocket knife and carefully sliding the box open. Inside was a set of jewelry, a diamond necklace and bracelet that I immediately knew, despite not having seen them before, had once belonged to Damara Megiddo. Was all I could muster. I took the jewelry and put it in my pocket before turning to JaneRezi. You ready? She smiled, and we left out the door for our walk. Battery Park, New York City. In the end, we decided to take a cab downtown to Battery Park and walk by the harbor. The district had been changing a lot since the New York Council was disbanded after a combination of police raids and low-blood unrest had effectively gutted it. The mid-bloods that had grudgingly supported their masters decided it was in their best interest to switch sides almost immediately. And finally, the high-bloods had come to their senses and began to divest everything out to the wider Alternian community. Unlike their cousins in Boston, the New York Council had been too inflexible to adapt with the times and change form. Instead, it had simply crumbled under the combined weight of everyone they'd been dedicated to oppressing. But right there, in that moment, none of that mattered. I was walking down by the water with my gal. The breeze coming in from the harbor was pleasant, and the weather was perfect. We walked hand in hand along the path, just a couple of gals being good friends. We took the path down to the water and stood there, looking out into the harbor. Ferries passed by on their way to and from various destinations along the waterways. Sailboats out in the beautiful weather glided along silently. Everything was peaceful, and nothing was wrong. I reached into my pocket and took out the jewelry.
It's nice,
JaneRezi said.
I mean, I can't see it, but the smell, the way the sound bounces off of it, it's hard to describe, but it's still nice.
I agreed, it was nice. It was probably worth a lot of money, too. And it was covered in blood. No matter how clean it actually was, no matter how many times it was washed, it would always be covered in the blood of the woman who wore it. Always be tainted by the fact that it had come from the man who killed her. I raised the jewelry over my head. And with all of my strength, I threw it out into the harbor. The diamonds hit the water and immediately sank below the darkly colored surface. I leaned over and kissed JaneRezi. She leaned into it and murmured contentedly. When we pulled back from each other, I looked down at her. I love you, JaneRezi. I hadn't quite expected to say it right then, but it was the truth. Something that had been on my mind for a little while. I saw her blush and look away instinctively.
I love you too.
Her voice was small but clear. I smiled at her and leaned in to kiss her again. We'd walk back to her place from there, enjoy the afternoon. Maybe later we'd go to a picture show and hold hands and make out in the back. For once, the world seemed to be flooded with possibilities. We turned and slowly started walking back up, away from the water, leaving the sunken jewels behind forever. Everything was peaceful, and nothing was wrong.
That is the end of the first story in this. We're going to read the second. So to those in chat who weren't there for the original description of this, I see one person who mentioned they're not sure what's going on. So this is a story set in the 1930s alternate universe where the Alternians showed up in the how do I get to the next work? Next work. Come on. Okay, I'll just go to my thing like a sucker. The Alternians show up in the 1900s and kind of forever change human society. So World War I and II didn't happen. There's millions of Alternians living on Earth. There's a whole troll society, as you may have gotten the sense of. The economics are slightly different from the real world. Here we go, past, present, past. So this is the second story. And of the three, I like this one the best. I really had a lot of fun writing it. It's the longest one. It also goes into some really interesting shit. This is Past, Present, Past. Summary. The year is 1935. 2 years have passed since Jane Crocker, Private Eye, and Detective JaneRezi Pyrope helped dismantle the New York Council. But one day, an old acquaintance from the past shows up terrified to talk to anyone except Jane and JaneRezi. Jane and JaneRezi head up to Boston to help their one-time associate. They soon uncover a mysterious group that wields a long-standing and malevolent influence over the forgotten corners of New England. Before long, they find themselves embroiled in another mystery that will lead them to the dark, abandoned places where the very fabric of reality stretches, and sometimes breaks. Chapter 1, Past Knocks Twice. New York City, 1935. The name's Jane Crocker. I'm a private eye. Where I hang my hat is a place called New York City. You may think you know it, but you really don't. You already know the story about how the Alternians came to Earth 3 decades ago. You know about the troll parts of the city and about the councils. You might even recall a bit of a sticky situation involving a certain private eye and a certain detective a few years back. Well, sort of. See, that part of the story managed to stay out of the local yellow rags. The coppers took full credit on the busts they made. I guess the fellow in the lobby with the nice neat hole in his head and the troll dame upstairs who'd been bled dry were just
casualties of some good old inter-council violence. Nothing to get particularly worked up about. Probably didn't hurt that I was playing a bit of mattress polo with the gal who ended up in charge of the investigation. That part ended up working out pretty well, and all of a sudden Jane Crocker, Private Eye, was persona non grata as far as the law was concerned. A certain Vriska Circuit managed to avoid mention as well. So that was all pretty decent, generally speaking. I feel like you know most of the rest of that part. How Detective JaneRezi Pyrote became former detective and started up a bit of a business with her favorite gal pal. New York City went through a bit of a shake-up after all that. Having one of the prominent human citizens who was a cornerstone of the whole state both murdered and implicated as a rapist who was selling off young gals tended to get folks riled up, especially when combined with a general uprising of most of the mid-bloods and low-bloods of the city. As much as the high-bloods would have wanted the status quo to stay in place, that would have been pretty much impossible at that point. So New York ended up integrating a bit, gradually. Trolls moved out from their places and humans moved in. I wouldn't call it ideal, given the general human and troll tendency to be pieces of trash, but it was definitely an improvement. Interestingly enough, this whole situation lent itself pretty nicely to the up-and-coming business of Pyrope and Crocker, investigators. Being that one of our founding members was former NYPD and Alternian to boot, we ended up with a lot of the bits and bobs that the force didn't want to or couldn't touch. Except we lay down some ground rules on this one from the out. We weren't going to be anyone's hired goons, regardless of the pay. After all, we were still getting most our monthly benefit checks from our mysterious benefactor, who was definitely not almost certainly Miss Jade Harley. So money wasn't really an issue. Instead, we took cases that could actually do some good, a lot of missing persons type stuff, a lot of cases where racists were being violent against trolls or humans who happened to be the wrong skin color. That took us top to bottom on the city and then some. We were out in Brooklyn or Queens in the expanding Alternian communities there, then up in the Bronx where the black community was flourishing on top of the economic advantage of having a flood of Alternians moving to northern Manhattan. The trolls didn't care much what skin color humans had, and it seemed that the black folks were a lot less likely to treat them like subhuman garbage. Things went well for a couple years. JaneRezi and I were going steady and living together, and that was pretty swell. She was a great gal, and we appreciated each other. We spent a lot of time together in and out of the office, and got to know a lot about each other, which worked out real well for both of us. The polo was pretty entertaining, too, if you catch my meaning. It was a quiet Friday afternoon in mid-September when everything kicked off again. It's a long story, and rushing the telling isn't going to do either you or I any favors. So I'd suggest you settle in on this one. The weather had cooled off just a bit, at least to the point where I wasn't feeling like I was sitting in a dang blast furnace every time I got to be in the office. Fridays were usually pretty slow in general. Folks tended to go out and get drunk, which meant more business for the coppers busting up brawls, and a lot less business for a couple private eyes, who mostly tracked down missing people and investigated crooked landlords and such. If we'd had a case, we might have been out pounding the booze-soaked pavement looking for information, but we'd closed the last one on the docket the day before and had basically nothing to do. I was at my big desk in the middle of the office, and JaneRezi was off at her desk on the side, feet kicked up on top and scribbling on a piece of paper. I appreciate that she let me have the big desk in the middle. That was a gesture of love that definitely didn't go unnoticed. Trust me, I'd paid her back in kind over the last couple years. Use your imagination. We had the windows open and the breeze coming in was nice. The kind of cool pre-autumn wind that kissed your neck like a pretty dame and made you want to split and spend the rest of your day in the park. "Hey, Rezi," I said, still half inside my thoughts. "You want to split and spend the rest of the day in the park?" Over the scratching of her pencil in the paper, I heard her chuckle.
I'm getting there, babe. Give it another 20 and see if anyone comes in.
At this point, I think they can just leave a message with our secretary. She laughed. That was code for shove a message under the door, and it had definitely happened on multiple occasions.
Let me finish this, and we can get the hell out of here.
She went back to scratching on the paper, and I smiled. I figured the fact that we hadn't gotten sick of each other in the last 3 years was a good sign. She was swell, and I was in love. This is the part in the narrative where you realize that I'm building to something bad. This is a story with some hills to it, and we're up at the top of one right now, about to come rolling down. There were 2 sharp knocks at the door. Terezi and I looked over at each other. It wasn't necessary on her part, but I think she did it out of habit from when her eyes still worked. She sniffed and frowned.
What's she doing here?
Terezi got up and walked to the door, turning her head from side to side, probably trying to figure if there was something up. She got to the door and pulled it open. Vriska Circuit was standing in the door. She looked basically the same as she had when I saw her just over 3 years ago. She was a tall gal, all long and kind of elegant looking, but in a way that suggested you really didn't want to cross her. Her hair was black and went all the way down to her waist in a kind of wavy cascade, all crowned with a pair of orange-yellow horns. Today she was wearing a dark gray suit and skirt, impeccably tailored, and it looked like being up in Boston had agreed with her. Or those were my thoughts on the matter until my gaze settled on her face. She looked haggard. Her eyes were sunken in like she hadn't slept properly in days, and her eyes darted around nervously. My mind was immediately rushing back to 3 years ago, not to the way she'd looked when she first came into the office. That had been all false confidence and smiles. This was the look when she was convinced that the love of her life, a certain June Egbert, was going to have her life destroyed by a vindictive New York council. "Terezi, can you lock the door, please?" I asked, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. Vriska was standing there, just kind of standing. I walked over to her and put my hand gently on her shoulder. "Vriska, do you want to take a seat?" She shuffled over to the chair and sat across from my desk, the one where the client sat, very much like the one she'd sat in 3 years ago, although that specific one had been trashed when my place was tossed by council thugs. I saw Terezi motioning with her hands. What's going on here? I shook my head. No idea. The dame had just strolled in here like it was 3 years ago, except this time she'd left her patent attitude somewhere far behind her. I took my seat from behind the desk and looked across at her. It was easy to see she'd been crying before coming here. It was hard to remember the last time I'd actually heard from Vriska. She and us weren't exactly in regular contact with each other. She'd sent us a couple letters from Boston, thanking us again for all our help and explaining how things were going with June and her and the Boston Council. It all sounded just hunky-dory.
"Can you two take a case?"
She hadn't wasted a single second getting to her point, but she sounded desperate. It was hard to place her tone, but that seemed right.
"There's something I need you to look into. I'll pay you whatever your going rate is and then some. It's urgent."
I felt like we'd bonded a little after everything we'd been through, but this was all business. Or maybe not. She seemed like she was trying to hold it together even as it was unraveling at the seams. I glanced over at Terezi, who shook her head. Still couldn't figure out how she could even tell I was looking at her. "Doll..." Oh, that's Terezi.
"Doll, for you, the going rate is 0.
Terezi kind of cocked her head to the side when... Oh, it was Jane. "Doll, for you, the going rate is 0. Terezi kind of cocked her head to the side when I said it. "Plus expenses," I added rather quickly. Vriska smiled for the first time since she'd walked through the door.
"Okay."
"What's the case?"
"I'm worried that someone is after June. Or me. Or both, maybe. I got a very strange telegram about a week ago. Before I could decide what to do, I got a letter in the mail yesterday, and I knew I needed to go for outside help." She'd been holding 2 folded pieces of paper. She handed the first one to me, and I instantly recognized the telegram slip. I unfolded the paper and read aloud, mostly for Terezi's benefit. "To the heir, June Egbert, stop. Your place has been secured, stop. Your role has been determined, stop. The order of the creators is awaiting you, stop. We are vigilant, we are eternal." I turned the paper over in my hand, seeing nothing that would explain the message or its origins. It was downright unsettling. Vriska's sudden appearance had made this a whole...
Yeah, me neither. I'm always, amazed that that's a thing. I don't even know why, but I'm going to use it. Blah, blah, blah.
Vriska's sudden appearance had made the whole thing a whole lot of sense and a lot... Blah, blah, blah. Made a whole lot of sense in a whole little time.
"There's more."
Vriska handed me a letter. It was written in a plain, somewhat blocky hand. Again, for Terezi, I read the letter out loud. "Heir June Egbert, the time is coming soon when you must choose to fulfill your role.
This must be done of your own free will and in good faith, or our good works will never come to pass. This world is corrupted, but by your power we can cleanse it and begin anew. Let all that know the name of the beast is the same as the Creator. They are birthed from the same mind and the same heart. Let all of understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. It is the sacred number 413, the number of the names of God, the Creator of the beast, the Alpha, the Omega, and the circle that binds, the order of the creators. Alpha, circle, Omega.
Oh my god, that's awesome. I didn't know that was a thing. That's cool.
I put the...
Yes, yes, Linkit, my chat has decided it wants to work again, so please do that.
I put the paper down on my desk and stared at Vriska. JaneRezi was the first one to speak this time.
What the fuck?
Her way with words was definitely something I loved about her. I don't mean that insincerely.
I have no idea,
Vriska said.
I would say it's just some weird religious thing, but they know her name. They sent both of these to her directly at our house. If I hadn't gotten to it first, I don't know what the hell is happening.
Cool.
She looked down at her hands and her eyes were wide, staring at nothing, but she was seeing something that hadn't yet happened, something that she was deeply afraid of. What do you want us to do, Vriska? What do you need that your people in the council can't provide? Her head shot up, and that afraid look was in her eyes. I wasn't used to this.
No, the council isn't an option here. I don't know who's in on this and who isn't. I don't know anything, and I can't say anything because someone will hear. I know you're not on the take. That's why I need you to.
Cool. That's easy to remember. Okay, cool.
Once more, doll, what do you need from us? My tone was soft as I could manage.
I need you to come up with me to Boston. Visit the council, see where June works, talk to people, poke around about this order of the creators, but be subtle about it.
She looked me dead in the eyes.
This can't get loud. This can't turn into 3 years ago. I love June, and I can't have her getting caught up in something that's going to hurt her.
And there it was, the truest, most unenviable position to be in. Someone you cared about was on the business end of a heater, and you didn't even know it. You wanted desperately to keep them safe, but you had no idea how to do it. Your first instinct was just to throw yourself in the middle, but you were never sure if the bullet was going to just tear right through you and hit them anyway. I don't think I really had a choice in the matter, you know. If I'd still been in my smokes habit, I would have lit one up right away, just to accentuate the inevitability of the whole situation. Because whatever happened next, I was already committed. Seeing the look in JaneRezi's face across the room, I could tell she was too. God help the both of us. We were all in.
And this is the chapter where I introduce one of my versions of one of my favorite ancestors. And I get to try out a voice for her, because I've never actually voiced her before. Similar to the Kanaya, but slightly different. Chapter 2, The Maid of Boston. North End, Boston.
In spite of being licensed as a private detective in the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Yes, I am reading my own fics. That is correct. That's what I do every Sunday. I read my own writing because I am a self-indulgent, narcissistic Homestuck. I am trans. Yes, I'm a non-binary trans femme. Yeah, I know I have a deep voice though. But I do my own fics every Sunday. I'm trans femme. Oh yeah, trans femme. No, trans femme. Yeah, not quite a trans woman. I'm non-binary. These are not awkward conversations to have. Yeah, no, I read my own fics on Sundays. Cool. Awesome. Very cool. Glad to have you here. I'm to be honest, I'm basically a trans woman who doesn't really feel comfortable with that label or using she, her pronouns. Although I don't object to being called she, her. I wouldn't go out of my way to say that's the thing I prefer. Gender is weird and it's complicated. But yeah, I read my own fics on Sunday evenings. And Bucky and Clever at Will at Homestuck read all sorts of people's fics on Mondays. Yes, they, them pronouns. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Pronouns in bio, I think. Depending on what platform you're on. Anyhow, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I try to put my pronouns in all my stuff and also like just basic information because I find that that's sometimes helpful. Also, whoever's on the Will at Homestuck account, did you have something to say before I start reading? I don't know if it's Bucky or Clever that's logged in because I can't scroll up in the chat now. I think it's Clever. Okay, cool. Awesome. Oh, it's Bucky right now. That's cool. Just being extra confusing. Thank you so much. Okay, cool. Nice. Yay. And yes, dudes spanking dudes. How old am I? I'm 37. I'm an old Homestuck fan. I'm younger than Andrew Hussey, though, so I'll always have that. I'll always be younger than Andrew Hussey. Yeah, I'm very much on the older end of the fandom. I had you on mute. 37. I'm 37 years old. I'm super old. But younger than Andrew Hussey, which is what I was saying. I always have that. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, an adult, exactly. I do think it matters because like living for a long time, you do have a slightly different experience. But also I was in a shitty abusive relationship for 10 years, so my look on life is probably different than a 37-year-old who got to like do self-discovery in their 20s instead of trying to survive. So I try to keep all of that in mind when I'm like talking to people. Anywho, I'm going to keep reading now. I'd only actually been to Boston a handful of times on cases. Once a dame's well-known husband decided to withdraw most of his life savings and run up there with some floozy, and I had been hired to ensure that he was adequately informed that he was welcome to do whatever he wanted as long as he maintained his wife in the manner to which she was accustomed, unless he wanted certain photographs to be released to the press. I suppose that was technically blackmail, but my moral compass had been a bit skewed back then, meaning I was broke and I needed the money. The other time I'd been to Boston, I was chasing down a runaway teenager on behalf of their family. When I got up there, it turned out she was working as a waitress in Cambridge near the colleges. It also turned out she'd split because her family had a tendency to beat her when she did anything they considered unladylike, a category that apparently included talking back to them and existing in the wrong way. I did not like the epilogues. Don't get me started on the epilogues. This fic is not epilogue compliant. This fic is not Homestuck compliant because it's a 1900s AU. Blah, blah, blah. I'd given her the entirety of my pay for the job and went back and told the family she died of a heroin overdose, a story they'd been only too happy to believe. I said my moral compass was skewed back then, not completely broken. All this is to say I had a strange relationship with the city. It felt like a foreign country and I wasn't familiar with the conventions. One convention I was familiar with, however, was how mobsters named their establishments. And starting
and standing outside the Alternian Expatriate Social Club, all I could think of was that this must have a very cozy relationship with the local coppers, or else the force here was basically bought and paid for. JaneRezi actually laughed when we arrived outside. I was able to restrain myself, but I got where she was coming from. Vriska glared at us.
Yeah, just real quick, I actually grew up in New England. I spent a lot of time in Boston, and I spent a lot of time in the North Shore. And you're going to hear, like, weirdly specific references to stuff that will mean nothing to anyone that's not familiar with the area. And I picked it just because, like, I was familiar with it. I also lived in New York for 10 years, so the last story had a bunch of, like, really specific stuff. But yeah, there's, like, really weird references to stuff. And I checked dates on everything to make sure that it existed in 1935. I did more research for this story than I did for, like, English papers that were based on, like, actual events in high school. Anyway.
The local law doesn't much care what they do, she said quietly. You'll understand why soon enough. It's not like when the New York Council was running things down there.
The building itself was pretty nondescript in and of itself. Windows were covered up and the sign itself was plain and unlit. I imagine that even if it were nighttime, the Alternian Social Club wouldn't exactly be lit up like a candle.
Yeah, that's legit.
Vriska started to walk toward the door, but stopped and turned to JaneRezi and me.
Listen, this might not be like New York, but there's some stuff you need to know before we go in there. The woman that's in charge here might seem pleasant and maybe a little bit flirty, but she will absolutely make sure you're fitted with a Chicago overcoat if you cross her. Don't talk about New York. That's a sore spot in particular. In fact, don't talk if you don't have to. I've been doing this for a lot longer. Let me lead. Vriska.
JaneRezi put a hand on her shoulder.
What do you want us to be doing exactly? You still haven't really been very clear about that. Just observe. We're going to make a couple stops, and I want you to understand who the major players are around here. Seriously, follow my lead and don't start any shit.
With that, Vriska pushed in through the door, and we were plunged into the dim, hazy interior of the Alternian Social Club. The scent of tobacco and liquor clung to the place like a shroud, and the overall effect was by turns inviting and somewhat repulsive. JaneRezi was smelling the air and turning her head. Vriska led us on, straight back. She nodded to the bartender, a stocky troll fellow with short horns, on the way back, and he looked disinterested. It wasn't all that different from dozens of similar rat holes I'd been down in my day. It might as well have been the Diamond Cabaret and the Bowery, although without the baggage that I associated with that place. Couldn't help but feel the similarity, though. That was the thing about living life. It had a way of constantly catching up on you. The social club narrowed as we went back, eventually leading to a single-file corridor that ended in a door that looked like it was made of considerably sterner stuff than the front door. Vriska knocked in a quick pattern, and the small window in the door slid open to reveal a scowling troll dame. "Oh, it's you." Those were the only words spoken, and the troll dame opened the door, letting us all inside. She had on a too big brown suit, and I could tell even at a glance that she was packing a shotgun underneath. We had officially crossed from the front to the actual heart of the business, now. As soon as we passed the door, it was slammed shut again. "Give me whatever iron you're holding and get the fuck out of my face." We handed our guns to the rude troll gal, and she nodded, and we were good to go. Vriska nodded back and led up further back into the social club, passing storage rooms and offices. We went up a flight of stairs, around a bend back toward the front of the club, and we were at yet another set of doors. Before we walked inside, Vriska stopped and whispered to us.
"Remember, don't be assholes. Don't say shit to her, except maybe yes, Miss Merriam. If she asks you to call her Auntie Purim, you say yes, Miss Merriam. You got it? Keep your mouths shut, and maybe you walk out of here again."
With that, Vriska opened the double doors. Normally, I'd probably lead in by describing the room as we entered, but in this case, all my attention was drawn immediately to Ms. Merriam. I knew enough about how the troll thing worked to expect her to look similar to Kanaya, so that part wasn't a surprise. She had the same
light gray skin, tall stature, and long, graceful features. What was a surprise was all the ways in which she was different. Porum was wearing a short green dress that left her arms and most of her shoulders bare. She had turned her body into a canvas covered in a variety of ornate tattoos. That was something I didn't remember seeing on a troll before. Her lips and eyebrows were pierced with a variety of simple rings. Her hair flowed down her back and had a vaguely tousled, unkempt look.
"You're staring,"
JaneRezi whispered with a nudge. There was no way she could know that, but I was definitely staring. I reeled it in before I could cause problems. Porum drew the eye so much that I almost missed the man standing in the far corner. He was a tall, somewhat lanky human, wearing a subdued gray suit and a pair of sunglasses. His skin was pale and his blonde hair was slicked back. As we walked in, Porum was smiling at us.
"Ah, come in, Vriska. It's good to see you again."
She looked over at us.
"And this must be Jane Crocker and JaneRezi Pyrope, the private investigators. Welcome to Boston, my friends."
She flashed us a sharp-toothed grin. As if sensing my apprehension, she continued.
"Don't worry. I know who you both are. I'm in the business of being informed. If I had my issues with either one of you, then perhaps you would be serving us lobster bait right now, instead of staring here ogling me."
She winked, and I felt a little bit of flush run through my face. She was easy on the eyes, I'd give her that. Vriska kind of bowed, which was weird to see, and smiled back.
"Just wanted to make my introductions while we're here in town. We won't be stepping on anyone's toes. I brought them here to help June out."
I suppose that wasn't technically a lie. They were both still smiling, but this whole exchange felt tense, as if a slip of the tongue or a wrong word could end very badly, very quickly. I didn't know if Porum was holding, but I knew that the rude troll downstairs was, and most likely the tall, silent type in the corner as well. Porum walked forward and wrapped her arms around Vriska in a hug. When she finished, she held Vriska's shoulder at arm's length in a gesture that seemed to hold an equal quantity of maternal and intimate. It made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, but if Vriska felt the same way, she was smart enough not to show it.
"That's wonderful," Porum said. "I genuinely love what June's been doing for this city. And I know all about New York's philanthropic private eyes. The ones who take the cases for the poor and downtrodden, who the law doesn't care about, and who don't have the money to pay for their own law. To put it bluntly, I admire both of you greatly."
I was about to say something when I felt JaneRezi nudge me, so I only nodded. JaneRezi leaned up against me, placing a hand gently against my side and squeezing slightly to let me know she was there. I appreciated it. I'd make sure to tell her later, one way or another.
"Where is June right now?"
Vriska asked.
"Oh, she's in South Boston right now, at St. Mary's. She'll be there all day if you plan to drop by."
Vriska nodded carefully. I'd never seen anyone nod carefully before, but that's what she did, as if she was calculating each element of each angle of the gesture.
"Thank you, Miss Merriam. We'll go there right away."
"Oh, please, Vriska. I've told you 1,000 times to call me Auntie Porum."
She winked, and I got the immediate impression that Vriska would be intensely uncomfortable doing that.
"Yes, Miss Merriam. Thanks for taking the time to see us."
She nodded dismissively, and I knew it was time for us to be on our way out. Without further ado, Vriska led us back out the office doors and down the stairs. But I was half expecting Porum to add some kind of commentary as we were on our way out, some kind of "be careful in this town" or something. But that would have been silly. She didn't have to do that. The Boston Council might not be populated with the scum of the earth that the New York Council had been, but there was no question that this was their town, which meant, as far as poor Miriam was concerned, this was her town. Our weapons retrieved from the rude troll and us out the door again, Vriska visibly relaxed, it was as if someone had come along and uncoiled her.
"Oh, thank God,"
she said, her shoulders slouching.
"Thank God that went well." "Vriska, what the hell?"
JaneRezi was still keeping her voice down.
"You were terrified in there. You mind filling us in on what the fuck that was all about?"
Vriska turned toward JaneRezi, and she was shaking. I wasn't sure if trolls had the equivalent to adrenaline. They probably did, and it was probably coursing through Vriska's cerulean bloodstream at that very moment.
"Do you know why the city is so well run? Do you know why the council here is so different from the New York one?
We stopped walking. JaneRezi shook her head, and I shrugged.
This isn't some goddamn utopia up here,
Vriska said, her eyes darting around.
There's a reason that no one fucks around in the council here like they did in New York. And that reason is poor Miriam.
She motioned for us to keep walking, so we did. She seemed eager to go see June, to get the heck away from Porum.
Porum wasn't from here originally. I don't know where she'd been, but she came in here, and the council was fragmented, just like in New York. Maybe not into the same shit yet, but getting there. Porum decided that wasn't going to work and started negotiating.
So she had either blackmailed or killed most of her competition. From the tone of the conversation, I strongly suspected the latter was more common.
Pretty soon she was it.
Vriska snorted.
She's fair, and she's committed to protecting the weak. But she's also completely ruthless. The coppers here are all on board, because the few that really stood up ended up mysteriously disappeared. She killed off the high bloods that were running the council here without a second thought, and declared the whole Hema spectrum a thing of the past.
I had wondered about that myself, given how big of a crud bucket it had turned out to be in New York. So the solution here hadn't necessarily been dissimilar, just timed differently. Vriska had gone quiet, and I wasn't planning to push for more information. We kept walking, and I kept reevaluating my opinion of the Boston Council in general, and poor Miriam in particular.
I say I did research for this, but what I actually meant is I just made sure I wasn't getting the locations of stuff completely wrong, and I was remembering names and dates. Water dame. All right. Chapter 3, A Reunion. South Boston, Boston.
We passed the rest of the walk into South Boston without saying much. I was still turning what Vriska had said about Porum and the council over in my mind. My experiences in New York had soured me more than a little to that kind of scene, and I wasn't keen to see the whole bloody spectacle repeat itself here. Vriska made it sound like it was different in Boston somehow. I wasn't so sure I believed her. The further we walked from the north end, the more the city changed. The buildings grew older, dirtier, and less well-maintained. The smell of festering...
Yep, definitely Southie.
The smell of festering garbage mixed in with the odor of ocean decay wafting in from the harbor, creating a distinctly unpleasant mixture. JaneRezi had decided to hold the corner of her suit jacket over her nose only a few blocks inside of South Boston proper.
It's Southie, and they treat Southie just as well as they do in real life. Or in the real life that we live in.
The people, too, had a shabbier look about them as we passed them on the street. Trolls and humans of various sorts were mingled together, although they all seemed to be dressed in a relatively plain, simple style. Patches and worn clothing indicated that these were not folks as well off as the ones that had lived in the northern part of the city. They all seemed to be constantly in motion, rushing in to make the next shift or get back home again. Maybe an hour after we left the social club, we finally arrived at St. Mary's Church in South Boston. It was, and I say this in the most charitable sense of the phrase, a trash heap. What might have once been an interesting example of neo-Gothic revival architecture was falling into disrepair. Windows were broken out, and someone had scrawled on a sign near the front of the church so that it read St. Mariam's, which felt darkly appropriate, given what I'd just learned about poor Miriam's role in the takeover of the city. Out in the front of the church building was a crowd of the locals, all milling around a series of tables that were set up. On the tables were a series of pots and boxes, and it looked like everyone was lining up to get soup and bread before filing off to another set of tables with chairs around them. Several people were serving the soup, but one in particular stood out, a woman with raven black hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. She was wearing a long blue dress, and her bespectacled face lit up as she bustled back and forth, helping to fill bowls and hand out loaves of bread. One look over at Vriska's flushed cheeks confirmed my first impressions. This was the fabled June Egbert.
Vriska!
June called as she left her station behind the table and ran over to envelop Vriska in a hug.
I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow.
She paused to kiss Vriska, who happily leaned into the affectionate gesture. I cleared my throat, and June pulled back, looking over at JaneRezi and me.
Oh,
she called out, smiling.
You're friends.
Before I fully knew what was happening, I was caught up in a warm hug that then seamlessly moved on to JaneRezi before rolling back to Vriska, who was being held in June's arms as she grinned at us. This woman had an energy that was going to be impossible to pin down.
Yeah,
Vriska said, seemingly having difficulty finding the words.
this is Jane Crocker and JaneRezi Pyrope. They're private eyes from New York, the ones I told you about.
June's face lit with recognition, and I was hit with yet another hug.
Oh, thank you so much. Vriska told me about how you helped settle things in New York. I was so worried that she'd gotten caught up in all that.
This seemed like an odd response, given everything that had happened. I pulled Vriska aside real quick. Had to ask her something before it slipped my mind, you know? Vriska, I said in a low whisper, how much of what happened does she know about? What exactly did you tell her? You know, on account of the blackmail, and the extortion, and all of the murder. Vriska shook her head slightly.
She knows that I owed the New York City Council a favor of some kind, and she thinks you were able to find me an out right before everything collapsed down there.
Okay, so June didn't know about the way her lover had brutally murdered the head of a major organized crime family for trying to blackmail June using her past. Good to know. Important to keep those kind of facts straight. I smiled gamely, patted Vriska on the shoulder, and turned back to June. Of course, doll, I said, not breaking my smile. I'm just glad we could help your main squeeze out. June blushed at that and muttered something I couldn't hear, then looked over to Vriska.
What are you doing here, darling?
June asked, worried for a minute. The grin she had broke ever so slightly. Maybe she was naive enough not to know fully what Vriska had been involved with in the past, but she at least had a sense. Vriska had clearly thought this through, at least a little bit.
They're here to check up on some rumors around town. Some rumors that the council heard about suspicious folks poking around here and asking questions. Just to make sure you're safe and everything's fine.
My mind quickly jumped back to the strange letter Vriska had showed us. The one addressed directly to June and full of more weird pseudo-religious talk than a pierside bar was full of drunk sailors at 1 a.m. I got that Vriska was trying to protect June here, but I couldn't help but feel that this was going to very quickly spiral out of her control. Out of anyone's, really. But June seemed satisfied with the answer, at least for the time being. Her smile returned and she looked at me, then JaneRezi, then me again, as if expecting us to say something. We kind of stood there awkwardly for a moment before I felt JaneRezi's elbow in my ribs and decided to break the silence. Just here to check the facts, ma'am, I said, drawing myself up and trying to look more professional than I felt. Probably nothing here to be worried about, but we know how important this kind of work is to the community, and the last thing we want is problems. It was 100% grade A horse manure. I had no idea how important any of this was to Porum and the council, if those were even two separate entities at this point, and I had no clue as to the lay of the land. I was mostly just guessing that June's apparently boundless optimism would overcome whatever suspicions she might have.
Oh, thank goodness,
June said. Well, I'd guessed correctly. June seemed to think for a moment, her brow creasing minutely.
I guess I haven't really noticed anything out of the ordinary. Most of the people here live here and just don't have the money for food. The council helps provide food and funds shelters in the area. It might not look like much, but they have a roof over their heads and hot food in their bellies.
While we were talking, June moved us slowly back over toward the line and resumed what she'd been doing without breaking stride. I watched as she grabbed a ladle and began handing out soup to the folks that were lined up. As she worked, June kept talking.
Miss Miriam came down here a few times even, just to make sure everything was okay. She's so sweet, and she cares so much about the people living here, not just the Alternians either. She cares about all the poor people here.
Vriska tugged on my shoulder, and JaneRezi and I slid over to one side. Vriska's voice dropped to a whisper as she spoke to us.
By the time June got here with me, Porum had already taken out basically all our competition. This doesn't feel like a council thing, you know?
I'd seen the letter and the telegram that were addressed to June, so I thought that I kind of did. But I also didn't want to rule anything out. There was always the offside possibility that this was some kind of power move that was trying to angle in through a soft spot in Porum's heart by attacking at her fondness for the community. If she even had things like fondness and soft spots to begin with. Out of the side of my eye, I saw JaneRezi glance up quickly, her face a sudden mask of surprise.
Wait, what did you just say?
She didn't explain further, but she moved over toward the line where June had just finished serving the last of the assembled people.
Where did he go?
I had no idea what she was talking about, but she looked upset. I put up a hand. "Trezzy, what's going on?" I asked, feeling like that something was about to drop. She was turning her head, training her ears to scan the crowd of people that were sitting and standing around eating. She sniffed the air, frowning deeply. After a few seconds, she turned to June.
The last man you served, the funny-smelling human. Do you know who he is?
Terezi asked. June shook her head. "I don't know him. He's not a regular, but that doesn't matter. He was polite, and he told me thank you, even if it was in an odd way."
Did it mean anything to you, what he calls you?
Terezi had moved closer to June, and her face showed lines of concern. I was getting lost here, and I could tell from her face that Vriska was too. No, but... June stammered off into silence. I don't understand. Is something wrong?" Terezi turned to me and leaned in, speaking low enough the others couldn't hear.
That man called her the air of breath. Anything sound familiar about that one?
And it did. I was getting that sinking feeling in my gut when everything starts to unravel, when the case becomes more than it seems. I had a feeling Terezi was in the exact same place. Terezi looked over at Vriska.
Look, Jane and I need to check out a couple of leads. I think we're going to be okay. You help June finish up here, and then head straight home.
Her tone didn't leave room for argument. Vriska and June both agreed, and stayed back to help clean up the soup while Terezi and I walked back the way we'd come. Once we were safely out of hearing range, Terezi leaned in and spoke to me again.
I don't like this, but we need to speak to Parham again, and we need to do it alone.
As much as I hated to admit it, I figured she was right.
North End, Boston.
We walked fast, and the trip back to North End took significantly less time than it had taken to get down there. Getting back to the social club wasn't difficult, and we walked inside like we were old regulars. Better to not draw attention with how unfamiliar we were with this whole environment. Terezi stopped me before we walked in.
Let me handle this. I know Vriska's afraid of Parham, and I think she has reason to be. But I think Parham is afraid of something else. I'd like to know what.
In we went, through the doors, past the bar, to the locked door in the back. The rude troll gal, after a moment of contemplation, decided to let us in again. She took our guns, and once again we were directed up the stairs into the room that poor Miriam used as her office. Parham was seated in the center of the room in her large wooden desk, and the mysterious blonde-haired man was still standing in the corner. Parham looked up as we entered. "Oh, you came back. How can I help you two lovely ladies?" Terezi glanced over at the man in the corner.
Can we possibly talk to you alone?
The man started forward, but Parham held up a long-nailed hand and shook her head. "It's fine, Dirk. You can take a minute. I'm sure it'll be fine." With that, the man grunted and retreated back through a back door. Once the door had clicked shut and a moment had passed, Parham spoke again. "Yes? What is it you wanted to talk to me about?"
Do the phrases air of breath or order of the creators mean anything to you?
Terezi didn't bother to ease into it. Parham paused and looked around the room as if checking to see if anyone was watching her. When she answered, her voice was quieter and sounded different. "What the hell did you just ask me?" Terezi's nose was twitching.
I don't think you're stupid. I think you know that Vriska asked us here for something specific beyond whatever bullshit she's already told you. But you're not concerned since you figured out it doesn't directly affect you. Well, you're right about that, but you also know this town better than anyone, and I need to know if those things ring a bell.
Parham was leaning toward us, and I could have sworn I saw sweat forming on her brow. "Where did you hear this?"
A man downtown said it to June,
Terezi said bluntly.
And we saw the name Order of the Creators in a letter, along with some symbols, a letter A and a circle and some weird sideways C thing I didn't recognize.
"I don't know what all that is," Parham responded, "but I'd suggest you hop into the next train back to New York City and forget about all of this. Make whatever excuses you need in order to feel okay about your decision. But get the hell out, and do it now. Even I could tell that this line of questioning wasn't going anywhere else. JaneRezi thanked Porum for her time, received a simple grunt of acknowledgement in return, and we were back out on the streets before we could fully process what was happening. JaneRezi pulled me in close.
She was lying. Or, I guess, hiding something? Trying really hard not to say anything, so she wasn't technically lying. Something has her scared, but...
JaneRezi paused and waggled her nose around, as if she were trying to place something specific.
Something about the smell. She was scared, but it didn't smell fresh. I know that doesn't mean anything to you, but I think this situation is something Miss Merriam up there is already familiar with.
JaneRezi sighed heavily.
God, this is so damn frustrating.
She clenched her fist against her thigh to emphasize just how frustrating it was. Gently, I took one of her hands and brought it up, kissing her knuckles softly. Listen, Vriska booked us a room in a hotel. Let's go there and take some time to relax. Think this all over. Vriska's with June, so they'll be fine. Let's go over what we know and figure out where we need to go next. Squeezing my hand, JaneRezi smiled.
Yeah, okay. Let's do that.
Right, I'm going to take a real quick break. I'm going to go use the toilet, and I will be back in like 2 minutes. Alright, I'm back. Unfortunately, I have not yet ascended above the need for human bodily functions. Alright, let's do this thing. Next chapter. Chapter 4, Scratches in the Dark. Near the City Common, Boston.
The Ritz was a far cry from the urine-soaked hellholes I was more typically accustomed to when working cases. It sat near the Boston Common, a stretch of green right in the middle of the city where farmers had once bought their cows to graze. Not much of that now. Instead, you saw a lot of couples out for walks, and folks generally enjoying the last traces of the New England summer. It was a pricey joint, to be sure, but since Vriska was footing the bill to put us up there, I wasn't complaining. JaneRezi and I had brought bags, but packed pretty light, and everything had already been delivered from the train station to the hotel. So we found ourselves sitting in a room several floors up with a decent view of the city. It was nice. JaneRezi immediately ran over and jumped on the bed, sitting and bouncing with a huge grin. I took a seat in the chair by the window and looked out to the city. I was in a pondering mood. I needed to focus and try to figure this out. Except, did we even have a case to work on? Vriska had asked us here because she was worried about the weird letters addressed to June, and that was certainly worrying. So, was the stranger addressing her using the same language from the letter? And the way Porum responded was certainly suspicious. Everything was adding up to be something fishy, that was for gosh darn sure. But what the heck did we actually have to go on? As much as suspicious evasive behavior was raising all kinds of red flags for me, it didn't do much to help paint a clear picture of what was happening. I always say that a crime scene tells a story. Well, the case does too. It's just a longer, more complicated story. And so far I felt like I had bits and pieces, a paragraph here and a sentence there, nothing much to go on, and no actual crime scene either, ironically. This is the part where, in the past, I would have lit up a smoke and stared at the window, maybe down some bourbon, but I'd stopped with the smokes on account of JaneRezi's sense of smell, and I promised myself I was cutting back on the booze. So my normally nervous habits were unavailable, and I resorted to drumming my fingers on the arms of the chair and tapping my foot.
What's on your mind?
JaneRezi's voice called from the bed. I looked up from my thoughts without turning. Just can't make this one make sense yet. Any thoughts?
No,
she said, and took a second.
Figure you're already past the point of wondering about how damn weird everything is, and around the point where you realize we don't know near enough about this whole thing to make hide nor shit of it.
I was sure hide nor shit wasn't the correct human phrase, but I also felt like JaneRezi was doing that on purpose. She had a talent for idioms. That's about right, I said, glaring at the window. You knew Porum was hiding something. Any other insights? JaneRezi laughed.
Oh, I wish. I hate to leave Vriska and June twisting in the wind like this, but we're way out on a limb on this. We're way out on a limb here. Porum's got some big goddamn secrets, though, I would say. Or she's scared shitless of something. Hard to tell, and I don't think it'd be a swell idea to ask her again.
No, I didn't suppose it would be. Heck, I said to no one in particular. I was glaring out the window again, letting those thoughts pile up and spill over inside me. Of course it wasn't helpful. The dang case was too loose right now to make hide nor hair of anything. Too many weird little bits. Too much uncertainty. I groaned and put my head back against the chair, closing my eyes. God dang, I said, massaging my closed eyes with a hand. I just want to forget about this stupid case for 5 minutes. For 5 dang minutes. The room went silent, and I could hear Trezzy kind of moving around on the bed but not saying anything. The chair was comfortable, and I didn't want to get up.
Jane,
Trezzy's voice called from the bed.
why don't you come lie down over here? It's probably more comfortable than the chair.
No, it's good here, I muttered, half to Trezzy and half to myself. I leaned back.
Okay, I can work with that.
More noise on the bed. A light step down, then more quiet.
What do you think?
Trezzy's voice, directly in front of me. I jumped in my chair and my eyes shot open. Holy heck, Rezzy, My voice died mid-sentence, and I suddenly had a very important clue as to what all the noise in the bed had been about. Trezzy was completely naked, with her arms crossed in front of her, grinning wildly. She gestured down at the chair I was sitting in.
May I, Miss Crocker?
I nodded, dumbfounded, and she practically leaped into my lap with a laugh. She had the top few buttons on my shirt undone in no time, and I'd already pressed her lips firmly up against my neck. I think I gasped. I wasn't entirely sure. Trezzy, what?
Shh. Taking your mind off of things. If you want me to, of course.
Surprisingly, I hadn't gotten much smoother in the whole love department since we'd first started seeing each other 3 years ago. So yes, I definitely wanted her to, but the sentiment came out more as than anything else. I ran my hands over her body, something I'd become intimately familiar with in the past few years. All the lines and scars and blemishes and marks were things I'd come to know and love just as much as the woman who held them. Trezzy had my shirt off completely, and I feel that this is a good time to point out that I hadn't gotten any more comfortable with the idea of voyeurs viewing this particular part of my love life. So I'll leave it here, and you will, as always, have to resort to your undoubtedly vivid imagination. Trezzy leaned in and kissed me full on the lips, holding onto my hair and pulling me in towards her. I was getting hot all over, and as soon as she pulled back, I let out a small moan and reached down. Really, though, the rest you'll have to fill in on your own. I'm not the kind of gal to kiss and tell. The telling part, that is. The kissing part I am most definitely on board with. To my credit, maybe to our credit, we did eventually end up on the bed. Completely naked, with the clothing basically thrown everywhere, but we were on the bed. We had an enjoyable enough time there, and that lasted a while. And then we both ended up just kind of draped over each other, enjoying each other's company and not saying much. At some point I drifted off to sleep. Trezzy was tangled up with me, and she was warm and soft, and I was so comfortable that I didn't even realize when I was under. I don't think I was completely asleep, because I was still vaguely aware that it was getting darker out. I would drift in, enjoy the feeling of Trezzy's skin against mine, and then drift out again into a surprisingly pleasant sleep. In and out, back and forth, drifting. There was a noise, a kind of scratching sound. I jumped, waking Trezzy in the process. She heard the noise immediately. Of course she did.
Someone outside the room,
she said. Getting up, she gathered the sheet around her in a makeshift cloak and grabbed her Colt from the nightstand. Trezzy walked to the door, slowly opened it, and peeked out into the hallway. She closed the door again, shaking her head.
No one there.
I let out the breath I'd realized I'd been holding in and got down from the bed to gather my underwear up. Putting my delicates back on, I groaned.
Hell of a way to ruin the mood,
Trezzy said, as if she was reading my thoughts. I grunted my assent and plopped back down onto the bed. Trezzy followed, putting her pistol on the nightstand again and draping herself in the sheet over me. Okay, so that was a decent enough way to pass the time. Often in fiction, there's a narrative device where something will happen at a particularly opportune time to advance the plot. I would pretend that it happened just then, but the truth was we spent another 20 minutes holding each other under the sheets before the phone rang. I reached over and picked the receiver up from the table at the side of the bed where it sat. Hello?
Jane? Oh, thank God you're there.
It was Vriska's voice. She sounded scared. I motioned for Trezzy to come closer so she could hear the conversation as well. Yeah, I said. I'm here. What's wrong? Her breathing on the other end sounded too harsh. Something had happened.
Someone was inside our house.
As soon as I heard her say it, Terezi raised her eyebrows, and I felt all kinds of alarms going off in my mind. Sure, Terezi hadn't seen anyone in the hallway, but how many places did this hotel have to duck off into that we didn't even know about? Are you gals okay? I asked, my voice trembling at least a little bit.
We're fine. I thought I heard someone downstairs, so I grabbed my shotgun to look around, and I swear I heard someone running off.
That definitely sounded bad. Do you need us over there? It was all I could think of to say.
No, Vriska responded quickly. Don't do that. Stay where you are. I own a place up in Gloucester. A blue house at the end of the road north of John Hammond's ridiculous castle. It's right at the end of the road, so you can't miss it. Ask one of the locals where the stupid castle is. I'm going to take the car, and June and I are going to drive up there right now.
Vriska, it's the middle of the night.
You think I don't know that? This is getting too weird, and I don't feel like we're safe here. I'm going up north.
I sighed. Okay, that's fine. Terezi and I will have to chase down a couple leads in the city first, but we'll meet you up there tomorrow or the day after. We'll have to hire a car. Vriska gave me the name of a car service that had a tab under her name and promised she'd pay whatever fees were involved, then hung up to go pack. I was left sitting next to Terezi, both of us still mostly undressed, but the feeling in the room decidedly different.
We have leads to chase down,
Terezi asked, cocking her head.
That's news to me.
I smiled. I know. I feel like we should spend some time tomorrow combing through South Boston, see if anything shakes loose. I know it's a long shot, but dang, if we haven't already run through all our other options. Terezi frowned, but I could tell from the way her jaw squared up that she had already made her decision between sitting around with Vriska and waiting for something to happen and taking to the beat and rattling a few cages. We'd grab what sleep we could, with the door locked and bolted tight, and see what we could find in the morning.
There's one of the other one of the other really specific New England references is John Hammond's Castle, which is a real place. It's now like a museum, basically, but in 1935, it was owned by John Hammond, who was some rich dude who built this, like, full fucking castle in Gloucester, in New England. It's really neat and also completely ridiculous. So, yeah. Chapter 5, Breadcrumbs. South Boston, Boston.
There's this myth of the ace private eye, the detective who knows everything and figures out the case before anyone else can even get a handle on what's going on. I'm telling you right now, that's a load of absolute horse goober. There are times when you're working a case and you get completely lost, or so turned around you can't figure out which way is up. When I started as a cop, I figured that finding clues meant you were closer to figuring out the truth and catching the crooks. Then I realized that the clues were often leading you around in a web, and the crooks and the cops were often the same dang people. And the one thing I found that worked above all else, when you get completely lost in a case, just pick a point and start walking until you hit a wall. It was in that spirit that Terezi and I went back to South Boston, found the church where June had been volunteering, and literally started walking. My reasoning was simple. The person who had spoken to June was likely local. There was no reason to come up to her otherwise when another vaguely sinister letter or telegram would do. They were probably familiar with her work at the church, since Porum had implied this was a regular kind of gig. They may have even come by previously, but whether or not that was the case, there was a chance that someone in the local community might key in on the name Order of the Creators and give us another thread to pull on. In real life, clues don't generally come with big neon signs attached. They were tiny bits and pieces, breadcrumbs that you found along the way. We started at the church, and we walked further into the neighborhood. I had my eyes out for centers of activity, bars and social clubs, the kind of places where people who knew about shady goings-on might be collecting to blow off some steam.
Oh, shit!
Terezi was grabbing my shoulder.
I smell him.
She didn't...
Cool, awesome. Thank you for coming by. Thank you for listening. I hope you tune in next week. I do this every Sunday at 7 o'clock Central Time. whatever that is in your local time zone. And I post on Twitter about it, usually the day before and the day of, to remind folks. So thank you for coming in. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good evening.
She didn't say who she meant, but it was pretty obvious from context. Our mystery man with the weird smell. I scanned the street looking to see, and sure enough, there was our stinky human walking away from us with his back turned. I said that clues aren't always big things, but sometimes life just drops a big one right in your lap. When that happens, the trick is to make sure you keep running with it. I put my arm around Trezi's waist and pulled her forward. We've got to keep up with him. See where he goes. I could hear the excitement in my own voice. We had a lead now, and it felt like a big one. One thing both Terezi and I were good at was following folks without them realizing it. But this fella didn't seem like he much cared who might be tailing him. He walked right along with his hands in his pockets and his head down, never once looking back over his shoulder. So we just strolled right along, enjoying the morning sun, as much as we could given the strange events of the last night, and keeping an eye on the stranger. He led us on a couple of turns before finally moving north up toward the piers. Before he could get there, our mysterious stranger ducked inside of a building that looked like a pub of some kind, but was completely devoid of a sign that gave its name. We stood back for a half hour and waited, but the stranger didn't come back out of the building. Finally, Terezi shook her head.
I think he might have gone out the back. It's hard to tell with the smell coming off the ocean, but I don't think he's in there anymore.
I stared hard at the place he'd vanished into, as if looking long enough would make more information pop out. The place was covered with various flyers, most of them yellowing and curling up. If this was indeed a pub or bar, it wasn't a very active one. Without taking a second to think on it any longer, I walked up to the wall of decaying advertisements and pamphlets. Our mysterious wanderer was likely gone, and even if he saw us, it's not like he would recognize who we were anyway. My eyes scanned down the various pieces of detritus stuck to the walls. Nothing really jumped out at me.
Alpha, Circle, Omega.
My eyes stopped and my heart rate shot up as soon as I saw it. It was at the top of a flyer, surrounded by images of two stylized eyes. I pulled the paper off the wall and looked at it, muttering aloud for Terezi's benefit as I read it. Usher in a new era. Unlock the hidden potential within yourself. Awaken the inner eye. Praise the Creator. Praise the Beast. It looked as if there had once been more to the paper, but it was now torn off at the bottom. I carefully folded the flyer up and stuck it into a pocket in my suit jacket.
Okay, what the hell was that?
Terezi asked. I had no idea what to say.
Water.
I wasn't entirely sure about going back to the Ritz, but we already had the room, and the car service wouldn't be able to take us up to Gloucester until the next morning. So we headed back to the hotel, got a different room, and made sure that the door was locked and bolted before we let ourselves start to relax. Neither of us was really in the mood for much of anything, so we ended up half-dressed in the bed, holding on to each other and listening to the bustle of the city die down as night came creeping up on us. A couple times, Terezi swore she heard someone padding around in the hallway outside, but it could have easily been one of the other guests returning to their rooms or one of the staff making rounds. I think we were just keyed up after Vriska's call the night before. Terezi actually fell asleep first, her head against my side. I followed soon after. The rail line stretched out and down. I could see it extending through the darkness. It seemed to go on forever. As far as I knew, the rail line had always been there. I had always been there.
Think of a good voice for this one.
At the end of the light, there's a tunnel.
At the end of the line, there was a tunnel. I didn't know how I knew this, but I knew it was I knew it with the uncanny certainty that I knew my own name. My name.
Your name doesn't matter here. Only what you are.
I wondered what I was. what was meant by that. But also, I didn't care what I was. I didn't care because caring about it was exhausting, and it was easier to simply drift.
The tunnel will take you where you need to go.
I wondered for a second what that meant, but I didn't care about it either. I walked along the rail line, slowly ticking off the distance as the ties slid by under my feet. The tunnel would take me where I needed to go. It loomed wide in front of me. I could hear whispering from inside. On the horizon, a hooded figure stood shadowed against the overcast sky.
He is watching over you.
I couldn't make out the detail beyond the silhouette, and I didn't care about that either. I just wanted to go into the tunnel. Needed to go into the tunnel.
We are watching over you.
The figures hunched around the entrance to the tunnel, and I couldn't make out their faces. I could see horns and not horns, trolls and humans, all huddled together. They said nothing, did nothing. They only sat and looked down at the ground. Above me, I could feel something, some kind of looming presence darkening the sky. It was immense, and my mind struggled to grasp what it was witnessing. The words to describe it failed.
I am watching you, Jane Crocker.
I was awake and moving so fast, I almost fell out of the bed. I ended up catching myself and half landing on top of JaneRezi. That woke her up, and she was out from under me and reaching for a colt on the nightstand before I could blink. She was scanning the room, listening and smelling. Wait, JaneRezi! I was trying to get my own breathing under control. It was just a nightmare. JaneRezi turned toward me and lowered the pistol, her face breaking into a grin.
Oh, shit, she said. You really had me.
There was a sound from near the door, a scratching, then a thump, then the sound of feet moving away. JaneRezi brought the pistol up again and was moving toward the door before I could react. I followed as quickly as I could, grabbing my own revolver from the nightstand. We stood next to the door, and JaneRezi nodded to me. I reached out, undid the locks, and threw the door wide. JaneRezi moved through the door with her Colt up. Of course, there was no one in the hallway. JaneRezi swore under her breath and turned to come back inside. I couldn't stop staring at the door. I just opened. JaneRezi smelled the same thing I was seeing, and I saw her face fall. Scrawled on the door in what appeared to be nearly fresh blue blood was written a single phrase. We are watching you. And below was written the now familiar set of sigils. Alpha, Circle, Omega. I was shaking. I could barely hold on to myself. It felt like I needed to cry and scream at the same time, and my head felt like it was spinning. I gasped, stumbled sideways, and felt JaneRezi catch me. She helped me back into the room and to the bed, slamming the door shut behind us. JaneRezi, help! That was all I could manage in that moment. JaneRezi sat me back and climbed onto the bed next to me, gathering me up in her arms. It's like the dream, I said, realizing even as I said it that would mean essentially nothing. It's happening just like the dream. I knew in hindsight that this wasn't strictly true, but in that moment it felt so real that it was all I could think of. I was trying desperately not to start losing it, and JaneRezi held me tightly. It's okay, she said. It's okay. Whatever she said, it was very much not okay. I didn't know which troll's blood was decorating our door, but none of this was okay. I shook my head. We need to get to Vriska in June, first thing when the dang sun rises. She didn't argue. She knew as well as I did that this was an escalation. We'd both seen how far these kinds of things could go, and neither of us wanted to be in the middle of another gangland shooting war.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of, this is the one where it, both this and the third one, take the noir formula and just, go hard left. This one goes very into, eldritch stuff, and number 3 goes into, other things. This one also actually has, a lot of, references to Homestuck, and, some of the Homestuck lore is important, which is not normal for my AUs, but I integrated a lot of it. But yeah, there's, stuff gets real weird real fast. Chapter 6, North of the Vale, Gloucester, Massachusetts.
Hammond Castle loomed wide as we passed it in the car. then dropped off into the background like an ostentatious monument as we peeled away to drive up Dolliver Neck to Dolliver Neck where Vriska had her house. Leaving Boston, it had been overcast, but the morning had broken into what promised to be a gorgeous day of clear skies. Of course, I couldn't stop thinking about the dream from the night before, or the writing scrawled on the door. We'd been able to clean that up before anyone noticed, thank God, but whoever had left the little message had now occupied a decent chunk of my thoughts. Not that I particularly needed an excuse to wax melancholy and introspective. That was pretty much standard issue when you were licensed as a private eye. But the clarity of the dream itself was picking at me. Blood without a body, cryptic messages basically everywhere. We had clues without a darn case to work them into. My basic thoughts on the matter were I was taking this case to heart a bit much. All the elements were there, the weird language of the letters, the references to some unspoken force out there, all this religious talk about creators and beasts, and all that other guff. I told JaneRezi about the dream, and she agreed with me. Everything was getting to me in a way that felt distinctly personal. But I also felt like there was something deeply and unspeakably wrong here. I couldn't tell you why I felt this way, but it was something I couldn't shake if my life depended on it. I told JaneRezi this too, and she had shrugged and given me the "what are you going to do" look, and that was about the size of it. After all, what could I do? We still weren't any closer to finding out what was going on. More weird hints that ultimately meant nothing. But someone in Vriska's house was something concrete. That was something I could really sink my teeth into. So the plan was to make sure Vriska and June were okay, then maybe check the locals out to make sure everything seemed safe. A couple detectives from the big city were going to stick out like a pair of sore thumbs around here, but there wasn't much I could do about that. I guess Vriska was a little apart from the local community anyway, given her pedigree in organized crime. The driver dropped us in front of the house and we were staring up at a Victorian house that looked eerily at home, nestled in the trees by the ocean. Of course, Vriska had a house that looked like something out of an Edgar Allan Poe story. This fit the facts so well it almost felt forced.
This is a bit much.
JaneRezi was saying what I was thinking. It was a quality I loved about her.
She could have gone for a nice cottage, but I guess not.
I sighed as we walked down the path through the front gardens toward the house itself. It was charming, if, as JaneRezi said, a bit much. The gardens themselves were quite pleasant, heavy with the smell of box hedges and wild roses planted more for their scent than their decorative purposes. JaneRezi seemed to be enjoying herself immensely, grinning as she practically skipped down the pathway. It was nice to see after life's nice events. Amazing how readily our minds adapted to changing circumstances. The feeling was still clawing at my mind, that feeling of wrongness that wouldn't go away. It didn't help matters much when we knocked on the door, and a very haggard-looking Vriska Circuit answered the door, pointing a Winchester lever-action carbine at us. As soon as she recognized us, her face softened, and she dropped the muzzle of the gun and stepped back from the doorway.
Sorry, she muttered. Kinda on edge. Didn't sleep much last night.
For one brief, irrational moment, I thought about asking if she dreamt of a tunnel at the end of a rail line. That felt like it'd be in pretty poor taste, but we did still need to have a little chat about the message on our hotel room door. Blood, but no body. I found myself unconsciously checking to see if Vriska was cut or injured. As far as I could tell, she was not. Not that she was the only troll in the world with blue blood, but my mind was jumping to all kinds of weird conclusions lately. Vriska ushered JaneRezi and me into a front room that was done up as a study. It was lined with various books and had a large desk in it. My worn-out brain made a sudden leap to the office of Jacob Harley 3 years ago. Different story, different time, different place. But the echoes were still there, and that was enough to shake me a little. There was a little corner with a set of 4 chairs, and I took a seat looking up at Vriska. "Get June in here. We need to have a chat." I used my "I'm not asking" voice, and Vriska narrowed her eyes at that. But she nodded and went to go find June. JaneRezi sat down in the chair next to me and reached a hand out. I took it, grateful.
Vriska does not have her dice here. So most of the they have powers type conceits don't exist. Wink, wink. It becomes a thing later. But as they are, they're basically, she's just a normal, she's a troll. but she doesn't have any like of her. No one's god tier. She doesn't have her dice. I think I was gonna reference that, but I decided it would be too on the nose. I think I make some gambling references every now and then with Vriska, but I didn't lean into it too heavily. The one exception being JaneRezi does have her like enhanced senses.
Hey, JaneRezi? I didn't ask before, but did you have any weird dreams last night? She shook her head.
Nope, slept okay until you were jumping over me on your way out of the bed.
I smiled sheepishly and my face flushed. Again, I'm sorry about that. She grinned at me and squeezed my hand.
It's fine, don't worry about it. I love you.
I blushed. Still wasn't used to hearing this gal talk like that, even after 3 years. I love you too. We sat like that for a couple minutes before Vriska returned with June. June was wearing a shirt and trousers today instead of the dress, and she looked like she hadn't been sleeping all that well either. She and Vriska took their places in the chairs across from us. I didn't want to waste any time. So who wants to scare you and why? Vriska blinked and June looked back and forth between Vriska and me like she was real confused at this.
I don't understand,
she said.
What do you mean?
I elaborated. Everything that's been happening has been real dramatic and spooky, but no one has made any moves to actually do anything. This isn't a novel. If they wanted to try to kill you, they would have just done the same thing the New York Council did to me 3 years ago and emptied a couple drums of lead into the store I was at the time. I saw June's eyes go wide and her mouth opened and shut like she was trying to process what she just heard.
Friss?
She said, her voice quaking.
What's she talking about? Were people trying to kill you too?
Oh, I felt bad for this gal. She was so sweet, and I knew Vriska had tried to soften what had happened in New York for her. She didn't sound mad that Vriska hadn't told her everything. She sounded worried that the gal she was sweet on had possibly been in danger. I could see the tears starting to come in the corner of her eyes. Vriska smiled and put a hand on her leg.
It's fine. I wasn't there when that happened. I was fine.
I remembered the time a certain Aradia Megiddo had been about to put a couple extra holes in a certain Vriska Circuit's head, and I thought that maybe I was fine was a bit of an exaggeration. I wasn't going to push the issue, though. That was for the lovely couple to discuss in their own time. Okay, let's keep a couple things straight here, I said. Someone wants to scare you. They're poking and prodding around, leaving weird messages and coming into your home and making noise. I think they're trying to do the same thing to us. I explained the writing in blood on our hotel door, and I saw June's face go pale. She looked like she was going to throw up.
Why?
She stammered it out with a gasp.
Why would anyone do something like that?
Another flash back to 3 years ago in my mind. A dame's body lying in a bathtub because some waste of skin had decided killing her would make his life easier. I felt for June, I really did. If I could go back to that innocent way of seeing things, I would do it in a heartbeat. I shook my head and looked at June. My guess is that one of you two is close to something that threatens someone's business. Since I don't think there's much competition in the Christian charity business, I would wager it's someone looking to cut in on something council-related, who figures they can spook Vriska enough from whatever it is to make their move. I shrugged, then continued. The fact that they haven't tried to get rough means they're probably just looking for a bit of an opening, some kind of hustle they want to run on Purim, maybe. It was a good hunch, but it didn't feel right to me. Not only was messing with poor Miriam an amazingly bad idea, this whole dramatic production felt like too much work for something as simple as trying to edge in on council business. Vriska groaned and bent over, her head in her hands.
This is so fucking stupid. What is this? New York Council folks are holding a goddamn grudge?
And that felt a lot closer to the truth. Maybe all of Gamzee's blackmail hadn't been destroyed after all. Maybe there was still someone who knew about June and hated Vriska enough to want to make her suffer. To make both her and June suffer before whatever hammer they were holding finally dropped. Purim was probably connected enough to know that anyone had come in from New York. I made a mental note to ask her about this later. I was worried that the information would come at the price of a favor, but at this point I was willing to risk it. I looked over at JaneRezi, and it looked like she might be having a very similar set of thoughts. Her face was lowered slightly, and her eyebrows were knitted in contemplation.
How often do you come out here?
JaneRezi asked.
Both of you.
June spoke first. I'm not here very often. My work in the city takes a lot of my time, but I do try to come out here on weekends from time to time. Vriska and I drive up together. Vriska shrugged.
I don't know. I usually only come out here with June. Our place in Boston is more convenient.
I had to hand it to JaneRezi. It was a good question. Their answers sounded like routine, and routine meant you could be tailed and found out. I had a feeling that Vriska already knew this, at least a little bit, but wasn't quite at the point of deciding to just flat out run to go to Porum and beg for some kind of protection. My sense was that it was something in Vriska's pride that would make it impossible. Her asking me for help in New York those 3 years ago had only come out of utter desperation.
Well, if there's anyone suspicious around, the locals would know, right?
JaneRezi again. Vriska looked up from her hands.
Probably. Closest town is a little fishing village called Seaward Vale, just to the south of the Hammond place. It's not much, but there's a general store and a bar, plus a little hotel that mostly caters to out-of-towners on their way up north. For some reason, not a lot of seasonal folks like it there. I think the locals creep them out a bit.
As much as the idea of ignoring the whole mess and sitting around chatting with these 3 lovely gals for a while. I knew we were going... I guess I missed a word there. I knew we were going to have to go to town eventually. Might as well get it over with.
Seaward Vale, Massachusetts, which is not a real place, although it is in an area that does have real, like, actual coastline, and a real town is there.
The trip down the coast was pleasant and short. Vriska had lent us a 33 Buick Roadster that made short work of the winding road.
Seaward Valers rise up.
And we were entering the tiny town of Seaward Vale before I knew it. Vriska's description of not much was, if anything, severely overselling the town. There was a little harbor with a handful of docks where the boats would return after their day's work was done. Houses clustered down a couple of main streets, and a general store and gas station hovered around the outskirts. The last and most notable features were a small hotel, really more of a large house, and a bar with Fisher's Rest written in crude hand-painted lettering on the outside. I wasn't sure where to start, but a couple of trolls were standing on the side of the road leading to the bar, so I figured we'd pull over and maybe ask them a couple of questions. As soon as I pulled the car over, one of them looked at me, then turned and spit at the tires of Vriska's car.
What the hell do you want?
He growled with the question at me, while his friend stared at us.
Uppity high-blood bitch on the hill too lazy to do her own shopping?
The friend laughed and decided it was his turn to spit on the car as well. This was definitely going about as well as I'd hoped. Afraid not, fellas, I smiled. I'm actually a private eye on a case on behalf of Miss Merriam down in Boston. Wondering if you fine gents could give me some advice. It wasn't exactly a true statement, but I figured that even up here, Porum's name might carry some weight. The troll glared and flared his nostrils.
We've got nothing against the Merriams, but we've got nothing to say to you. Best be getting on your way, and stay away from the circuits.
They didn't say anything else. Just turned and walked off toward the little harbor.
What the hell was that about?
As usual, JaneRezi was saying what I was thinking. I shook my head. I have no idea. Let's check the bar out and see if we can get the heck out of this town. It bothered me that they had just assumed I was coming here on behalf of Vriska. Assuming, of course, there wasn't another uppity high-blood bitch on the hill, which I decided was unlikely. Did they just assume that an outsider was likely to be working for her, or did they actually recognize the car? If they did, why? More questions, no answers. Around and around and around we went. So we pulled up to the bar, parked the car, and got out to ask some more questions. I was sure would provide us with only vague and unhelpful answers.
We gonna stick with the line about working for Porum?
JaneRezi asked before we walked inside. I nodded. Sure. They don't seem to like Vriska much around here, so let's go with... Porum suspects Vriska's been skimming and wants to know if she's been receiving any unusual visitors lately, or had anyone poking around the house. JaneRezi nodded. We pushed inside the bar. The building was rough, basically a simple board shack that had been expanded out gradually. It was pleasant enough now in mid-September, but it would get pretty uncomfortable when the New England winters hit. The whole place was dimly lit with bare bulbs, and had a simple bar set in the corner with stools around it. A scattering of tables and a single pool table with half the velvet torn off of it were the entirety of the rest of the room's furniture. There were a couple of patrons sitting around the tables playing cards, and a tall human man standing behind the bar cleaning glasses. He wore a button-up shirt and trousers, and his black hair was slicked back over his head. The bartender saw us and glared.
Oh boy, can I do a New England accent anymore?
We don't want you in here.
He spoke with a thick New England accent, here sounding more like here. I smiled and walked over closer. My good sir, I'm here on behalf of Miss Poor Miriam. I believe you may have heard of her. The bartender was still glaring.
Sure, I've heard of her. No one gives a shit.
I half expected him to spit, but he somehow refrained from doing so. Don't misunderstand me. I tried to stay calm about it. I just want to know if anyone has been spotted near the house up by the way, the Circuit resident, recently. You see, Miss Circuit has been in the
No one gives a shit about Miss Circuit here.
He cut me off abruptly.
And if you know what's good for you, you'll leave Miss Circuit to us and be the hell off on to Boston or wherever the hell you came from. Tell Miriam to back off.
He gave us a look that said the conversation was definitely over, and the card-playing patrons were starting to sit up and take notice. JaneRezi gave me a little nudge, so I nodded, thanked the bartender for his time, and turned to walk out. As we were walking, JaneRezi stopped, and I saw her raise her nose up into the air.
Weird. I smell it again.
She took a couple of sniffs, walked over to a wall that was plastered with various flyers. It reminded me eerily of the building in Boston, except this one was covered mostly in local information that was most certainly long out of date. JaneRezi sniffed again, reached down, and grabbed a yellow, tattered flyer that was half hidden under another piece of paper tacked to the wall. She was careful to do it quickly and without the bartender or patrons noticing what she was doing. As soon as she had the paper, we walked back out of the bar and into the afternoon sun. As soon as we were back at the car, JaneRezi handed me the paper. I looked it over, and a name jumped out at me. Lalande. The heretic Lalande has forsaken you all. Do not trust her. Do not listen to her lies. The Creator denies her. The beast consumes her. Alpha, Circle, Omega. The paper was worn, old. I turned it over in my hands, looking for more, but there was nothing.
It smells like that person we tailed in Boston,
JaneRezi said.
Old, but the scent is still there. Not sure why it's got Lalande's name on it. Neither of them looks old enough to have been more than a young teenager when this was probably written.
Maybe it's a different Lalande. I knew it was probably nonsense as soon as I said it. It wasn't exactly a common New England name, and it felt like too much of to be a coincidence. I sighed. The world was feeling especially heavy today, and it was starting to feel a little difficult to hold everything up. We need to drive up to Gloucester. We've got a phone call to make. JaneRezi didn't even ask why we couldn't do it from Vriska's place. That was one of the reasons I loved her so much. She was thinking the same thing I was. Vriska's place wasn't necessarily the safest, most secure place to start asking questions I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answers to.
Oakley-dokley-doo. Okay, so I have been reading for almost 3 hours. So all of y'all who have been sitting here for the duration, I really appreciate you listening. I'm going to call it for the night, and I will pick this up next time. This is a longer one than the one before, and I will probably spend... it's probably gonna be 2 more nights to finish it. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for listening. If you like where this is going, like with the weird shit that's getting dropped, I think you'll like the fic in general because that stuff keeps getting weirder, and it really leans into that. And it's a lot of fun. It's heavily inspired by Lovecraft without the racism. And like the weird New England genre of fiction. So thank you for listening. I will hopefully see y'all next week. And also tomorrow, this channel will actually be hosting the Will It Homestuck community live read. One out of the 2 people still in the chat already knows this for sure, and I don't recognize Zion Blue, your username, but if you're on the Will It Homestuck Discord or are on Twitter following any of us, then you know that too. But we will be doing a awesome, good job, very nice. Yeah, we'll be doing a community read. You follow me on Twitter already? Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I'm already bad with names like in real life, so people on Twitter, I'm like, just, yeah, I probably know you somewhere else. But yeah, I will be doing a community live read, so if you want to participate and read, that's cool. If not, you can watch on this Twitch channel, and also the Will at Homestuck Twitch channel will be like mirroring it. So hopefully I'll see you then, and hopefully I'll see y'all next week when I read some more of this fic. So thank you very much for listening. I had a fun time reading, and I will see y'all later. Bye!